Good evening, everybody. This formal meeting of the Board of Education for January 27, 2015 is called to order. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to everyone present and to our television viewers. Any item that will be voted on this evening has been posted as required by state law. This meeting is being televised live and will be replayed throughout the next 2 weeks. Please check the board website for replay times. This meeting is also being streamed live on our PPS TV Services website. Student Representative Jaswal is absent this evening. Before we start talking about our agenda items, I'd like to take a moment just to thank the Portland Public Schools staff for the presentation they provided last week at our board retreat on Wednesday night. We spent that time looking over the board's work plan for the next year, and it was just amazing, I think, to most of us, how much work we had gotten through this year that's on our work plan. We still have a lot to do, but how much we've gotten through, and we just wouldn't be able to get that work accomplished in the time that we've been able to accomplish it without the support of our wonderful staff here at Portland Public Schools. They do a really phenomenal job for us. So I just want to thank them. So I also want to provide a very sincere thank you to the members of the Students Advisory Committee on Enrollment and Transfer. We didn't get a chance to do that last week, and they just did tremendous work for us in a very tough job and sometimes thankless, but we really appreciated that. They provided us with excellent recommendations. Okay. And I don't know how many, are there SACIT members out there in the audience? I think I saw Rita over here, others. Yay. Thank you very much, all of you. We also had a debrief, the superintendent had a debrief with them last week, and again, we just can't, we can't do this work just as a board without the support of community and members of people who come forth to be on our committees to help us with that work. So we really do appreciate it. Thank you. Now, our first agenda item is Superintendent Smith. Would you like to present your report?
I would. And again, I'll also thank SACIT. It was a good just honoring of 18 months of work that had been done by a citizen committee that was really outstanding. So again, my appreciation to SACIT. First thing I'd like to talk about is our Successful School Survey, which launched on January 20th. And you can see the materials up on the screen. The survey asks questions in 4 areas that's really measuring perceptions of school climate in our schools. It looks at the sense of security, the teaching and learning, the interpersonal relationships, and the institutional environment in all of our schools. We're working really hard to get 40% participation among our parent community. We're asking staff and 5th, 7th, and 10th grade students to take the survey that's tailored to seek their perspective starting next week. The survey is important for many reasons, including that it assists us with all 3 of our top priorities. By understanding the climate in our schools, we have the opportunity to improve the learning environment and students' sense of belonging that assists with learning to read, avoiding out-of-school discipline, and graduating on time. And we appreciate the work of our survey partner, Portland State University's Policy Consensus Center, and the nonprofit Oregon's Kitchen Table, which offers survey tools that will allow for a high level of analysis of our results for the betterment of our schools. And we intend to have this be a regular thing that we do every year going forward, so we'll also be able to measure trends over time, which we're really excited about. So thank you to everybody. Please pay attention. Schools will be offering multiple ways if you don't want to do it online. They'll also have hard copy surveys that you are able to take. Martin Luther King Service and Tributes. I want to congratulate our students, staff, families, and schools who participated in tributes to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. A number of schools held days of service and cleanup days and did service projects in the community. We also had a number of our schools who turned out to perform both music and dance at the Martin Luther King celebration at the Highland Center. I attended the celebration and was truly proud of our students and our music and dance directors. They are like a huge part of the fabric of that celebration, and it is a wonderful day-long celebration. A highlight of the event was when Harriet Adair received a Lifetime Achievement Award from the World Arts Foundation. Harriet is our Assistant Superintendent for the Office of Early Learners, Student, Family, and School Support, and the World Arts Foundation honored her ongoing commitment to the education of young people in our community. And I wanted to just do a huge call out to Harriet. Congratulations. It was really a moving tribute and honor. A lot of things have continued to emerge with our third grade reading initiative, and partners have been part of helping us celebrate this. Lou Ferrigno, who is a bodybuilder trainer and the actor who played the Incredible Hulk in the CBS TV series in the early 80s, visited Vernon School to take part in the district's effort to ensure all students read well by the end of third grade. He was in town for the National Comic Book Convention, and as a child, Mr. Ferrigno was teased by other children because of his hearing loss and speech impediment. And reading, especially comic books, became an escape for him. He loved characters like the Incredible Hulk because they were strong and powerful and did not get teased. So he enjoys meeting with kids and telling this story. He became a bodybuilder by age 20 and the youngest ever Mr. Universe that led to his acting career and then to his role as the Hulk. And it all began, he told the Vernon students, with reading. So kids really enjoyed this visit. And actually I saw clips of the Hulk featured on the news that were a hoot. Just special effects have come a long way since the Hulk. They had one scene of him wrestling with a bear in the water that actually looked kind of real in the water, except the green of him was coming off on the bear. And then when he goes to throw the bear, he goes like this, and it's like a little floppy stuffed bear. It was really funny. Anyway, kids loved getting to do this with him. And it's being really fun having people participate and come to the schools and do assemblies and talk about reading with our kids and our families. People are loving it, and it really is getting students enthused. So, coaching boys to men. So our PIL, Portland Interscholastic League, is dedicated the Coaching Boys to Men program that works to make our sports teams avenues for engagement, commitment, and positive behavior in our schools. We had a successful pilot program last year at Franklin High School, and this year we'll extend Coaching Boys to Men to all of our high schools. And it's a program that aims to prevent domestic violence and sexual assault. The National Coaching Boys into Men program relies on the roles of coaches as mentors to help young men manage emotions in a positive manner. The expansion of the program to all PPS high schools is a partnership between the PIL, Raphael House of Portland, and the Multnomah County Defending Childhood Initiative. I attended the announcement of this program expansion during the PIL Boys Basketball Showcase this month, along with Mayor Hales, County Commissioner Judy Shiprack, and our athletic director, Marshall Haskins. Marshall's quote on this: "Sports don't teach character, coaches do. Coaching Boys into Men maximizes the ability of our coaches to use teachable moments to assist in the growth of young student athletes. We look forward to promoting a similar program for our young women in the very near future." Really exciting, and I'm just going to say people are also so enthused about just rebuilding the PIL. This was a Saturday event, had tons of people over at Marshall High School watching the games all day long. Pardon?
We're just curious if they had the same kind of program for young women.
That's what Marshall said. We're getting ready. That's, yeah.
I said,
Yeah.
girls into men.
No, girls into young women. Yeah. I'm also pleased to tell you about our middle grades' work to end bullying and promote kindness. 22 of our K-8s and middle schools participated last week in the National No Name Calling Week. Our schools held a number of activities. Many were led by the school counselors and by student leaders. Those activities are part of a larger effort to create healthy school environments that are inclusive of all students. Roseway Heights created this beautiful kindness garden that you see. Fifth graders at Skyline taught second and third graders how to combat bullying. At Jackson, the entire school is involved in 3 weeks of lessons and assemblies. And tonight, you have before you a resolution supporting the work of middle grade students participating in the No One Eats Alone Day to end social isolation, which will be on February 13th. So we're just really excited to see the work of our student leaders promoting positive student culture in our schools and in our middle grades in particular. I want to just put out an alert to mark your calendars for February 19th at 6 p.m. We are doing our first ever arts showcase. The Newmark Theater downtown will be the special location, highlighting the visual arts and performances of our schools that have come about because of the support of the arts tax. The showcase, called The Heart of Portland, with emphasis on the art in heart, is an appreciation event for Portlanders who are helping the arts to blossom once again in our schools. The event is free, but tickets are required as space is limited. And I really do encourage folks to attend. This will be a really great celebration of the arts in all of the ways they're showing up in our schools. After returning to the restored building after Marysville had been destroyed by fire, and the school has been back in their building for the last 2 years, Marysville has become a place of calm through mindfulness. So Principal Lana Penley has led the staff and students through a mindfulness program that reaches every grade, and the results are remarkable. From a healthy school climate to a reduction in discipline referrals. The program is so impressive, we sent out a video team to document what's happening there, and we'd like to show it to you. And this is also something that a number of our other schools are learning from and potentially working to implement in their schools. So here's the clip.
And we saw some of the kids were showing up, frankly, sad. And it began to look at schools like schools should not be a place of sadness. I've never seen anything like this have such an impact.
It took all the negativity out of my head and I was able to write more gratitudes.
A brain break is a big part of our day at Marysville.
So we're really going to find out who can follow our brain break and ignore our distractions. And you want to try to keep your body still. If our bodies are still, our minds can really focus on our breath. Our eyes are soft, we're looking down.
What we know about mindfulness is that it assists us in our ability to self-regulate, to manage our emotions.
Soft eyes.
It's a nice tool that I can use to kind of gather in the children once again to a calm place where we can learn. I think that's the huge benefit for me. It's a way to quickly dispel the conflict.
It helps you with tests and focus and just kind of helps you get the job done, and it's pretty easy.
It's a welcome addition to life and education.
Thank you for being mindful today.
Everything has improved at our school. Teaching these mindful practice is a huge piece of that. If a classroom is joyful and optimistic and has a compassionate way about it, we see less reactive student-to-student interaction. There's more respect that's in the classroom overall.
The last thing I wanted to just recognize is King Elementary School. We just got a report from the U.S. Department of Education and American for Arts about our Turnaround Arts Grant, and the board received copies of this report tonight. King was named one of 8 schools to receive a Turnaround Arts Grant 3 years ago. And this is a report on the success of the programs that were part of this. And I just wanted to call out some of the things that were noted in the report. The independent study reveals substantial gains in student achievement at Martin Luther King School in Portland, Oregon. The MLK reading proficiency rate experienced a gain of 41.03% between 2011 and 2014. Martin Luther King School also noticeably improved attendance rates, increasing from 94.7% in 2011 to 98.6% in 2014. 98.6%, that's great. They also reduced both in and out of school suspensions by 70% between 2011 and 2014. Math scores were less successful, and that's been featured in the Oregonian, but the positive gains, which were pretty tremendous, did not show up in the article, so I thought I would make them available to you. The other thing that the study called out is that 87% of our non-arts teachers implemented the arts into their curriculum, and it made special mention of our critical partnership with the Right Brain Initiative, which is a really awesome partnership that we have here in Portland that really helps to build arts across the curriculum in a number of our schools. So I just wanted to call out and say congratulations to King for the acknowledgement in this report and being called out for bringing the arts to kids at King.
Thank you very much, Superintendent Smith. great news, some really great news there. Okay, at this time, we'd like to move on to student testimony. Ms. Powell, are there any students signed up for student testimony?
Yes, there are. We have Sarah Bader and Bethany Thomas.
Okay, as you are coming up, I will go ahead, come on up, have a seat, and then I'll just read the instruction for public comment so you'll know what you're doing there. Thank you for taking the time to attend this meeting and provide your comments to the board. We value public input and we look forward to hearing your thoughts and reflections and concerns. Our responsibility as a board is to actively listen and reflect on your comments. The board will not respond to any comments or questions during public comment, but we've asked our board manager, Roseanne Powell, to follow up on issues raised during testimony. Roseanne today is located over here at the desk. Guidelines for public input emphasize respect and consideration of others. Complaints about individual employees should be directed to the superintendent's office. You have a total of 3 minutes. For the first 2 minutes, the green light right there in front of you will come on. When you have 1 minute left, the yellow light will come on, and when your time is up, the red light will come on and a buzzer will sound, and we ask that you try and wrap up your testimony at that time. Again, I just want to thank you for being here tonight. We appreciate your input. You can go ahead.
One of my favorite qualities of my school
I
is
just
that-
want to interrupt you for just a second. Would you go ahead and tell us your name and spell your last name for the record? Thank you.
My name is Delaney Alvord, A-L-V-O-R-D, and I'm from Beaumont Middle School. One of my favorite qualities of my school is that at Beaumont, we don't separate by race or gender, but by interests and common topics that we all talk about in a unified group. But there are still people who sit alone at the lunch tables. I've talked to these excluded students, and they're no different from the other kids. I don't think it feels good to sit alone, so I'm glad that Beaumont participates in No One Sits Alone Day. At Beaumont, the Unity Leadership Club puts on a No One Sits Alone Day along with an assembly about peacemakers in February. I love this club, and I personally wish it could go on all year.
Hi, I'm Sarah Bader, B-A-D-E-R. I'm from Beaumont Middle School, and one of the clubs at Beaumont Middle School is Unity. 7th and 8th graders can be a part of it. And what I like about Unity is it is a welcoming community, and it brings out awareness to everybody's differences and diversity and allows me to meet new people. Every year, Unity puts on a mix-up day at lunch. This doesn't seem to be all middle schoolers' favorite, but it's a day where everyone is a bit of an outcast and has to feel a little awkward in order to meet new people and step out of their comfort zone. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both for coming.
We also have Claire Lyons and Stella Severborn.
Great. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm Claire Lyons, L-Y-O-N-S.
Oh, and I'm Stella Fearborn, F-E-U-E-R-B-O-R-N.
And we are a part of a group called SOAR at our school. It stands for Students Organizing for Awareness and Respect. And we've been working hard to really educate our school and spread awareness about kindness and respect in the community.
Mm-hmm. And Roseway Heights is working hard to be inclusive with all students because it's our belief that an inclusive community is a stronger community. So on February 13th, we have chosen to help by participating in National No One Eats Alone Day.
We have decided to theme tables for this day, and just with the fact in mind that everybody has a place where they fit in, and people will always fit in somewhere.
And we will also be visiting classrooms throughout our middle school hallways, spreading
You can go ahead, 'cause there are
word
two
about
of
the
you.
event. And we'll have cookies at each table with dietary needs in mind, just to make the event more fun. So, thank you.
Thank you both very much. That's it?
We have bracelets if you want them.
Great. Love that.
You guys, thank you so much.
So having students is always one of the best parts. So thank you very much for joining us today and for telling us about No One Eats Alone.
And can I read the bracelet?
Yeah, sure.
So the bracelet says, dedicated to ending social isolation beyond differences. Thank you, you guys. Really nice.
Okay, at this time, we will hear from our Portland Association of Teachers rep. As part of our agreement with PAT, we provide time on our agenda at regular board meetings for brief comments. So I'd like to welcome PAT Vice President Suzanne Cohen. Welcome.
Thank you. I am here representing over 4,000 teachers that are fighting for the schools Portland students deserve. I'm Suzanne Cohen, Vice President of the Portland Association of Teachers, inviting you to join us in doing the right thing for students. It is absurd to stockpile funds at the 7% contingency level when our schools and students have immediate needs that you can meet. I'm aware of an amendment to come up with a plan to spend some of the money, which of course we favor, but please, keep that money close to the students and close to the classroom. Don't outsource to a third party because you can't outsource core values to people who aren't invested in the system like your employees. So I know that I serve on the workload committee, which is a joint task force with administrators and educators, and they have made several recommendations. And I urge you to read through the workload committee's recommendations. You haven't gotten them?
Haven't seen it yet.
Okay. Please, I'll get that to you, but I would like you to see the workloads committee recommendations for ways to spend some of the additional funds. And then I wanted to present a few ideas that we have. So one is special education. In previous budgets, special education has had some set-aside money that could then be spent later in the year as things arise. This year, there's no extra funds for special education. So as educators have caseloads that are too high, nothing can be done about it. As students' needs rise and maybe need some para-educational support, there's no money to fund that. Now this is terrible and abhorrent on its own, but at a time where you're launching a special education redesign and trying to change the program, you need to be investing more resources and more opportunities to help it be successful. This is a problem you could solve right now, right away. Another idea is educational assistance. Currently, there are no substitutes for educational assistants. These are people that are providing direct service to our students, especially in some of our primary grades like kindergarten, Head Start, and pre-K. These people directly providing service to our students have no one in their place when they are not there. This is another problem you could solve right away. Finally, another idea for the money would be to give it to the principals for their contingency, to spend how they see best fit at their schools. There are many schools that are running out of paper or have already been rationing their paper supply. We have many new teachers who needed computers, textbooks, classroom supplies that we could be providing. Principals could also be using this money for release time, for collaboration, for PD, to help accomplish the goals that we have set but aren't properly funding. These are just a few ideas we have. So yes, I support an amendment to come up with a plan, but I urge you to make sure that that plan has your stakeholders involved. I would have a meeting with all your representative employees as well as PAPSA, bring them all together so that we can work together to create the schools our students deserve. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, at this time we're going to go ahead and have public comment. Ms. Powell, I know we have people signed up for public comment.
Martin Lindenmeier, and I haven't seen Ephraim Macon yet. I'm Martin, okay. Bethany Thomas.
Come on down. Sure, yep. You guys heard the instructions for public comment when I gave them earlier? Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, sweet. Hi, my name is Martin Lindenmeier. My last name is spelled Lindenmeier. First of all, I wanted to wish the board a good evening. I'm here to deliver a testimony on behalf of Outdoor School with the hope that it will be restored to a full week for Portland Public School students. See, over the last 15 years, I've been a 6th grader, high school student leader, college specific needs volunteer, and an adult staff member with MESD's outdoor school. Needless to say, I believe in the power of the program, and it is my hope that I might use these next few minutes to, first of all, say thank you for what you've done already for the program, keeping it going, even in its limited capacity. And second of all, to remind you of the power of this program has on the many residents of Portland, Oregon. When I was in 6th grade, outdoor school provided me with a sense of self-worth. It gave me faith in people, and it taught me that under certain conditions, you can trust complete strangers to lend a helping hand or say a kind word when it's most needed. When I got to high school, outdoor school taught me work ethic. It challenged me and forced me to care and be responsible for other human beings. It compelled me to perform for my cabin and for my kids. And it overwhelmed me with emotion when I allowed time for reflection. When I got to college, outdoor school told me to be humble, to be flexible, to be inclusive. It shifted the tension away from me and showed me what it meant to step back and work behind the scenes with no expectation of recognition. It taught me the experience of outdoor school is designed to be shared, and it belongs to everyone. No matter your race, class, gender identity, economic status, physical or mental ability, or popularity at indoor school, at outdoor school, you're equal. In my adult life, outdoor school has made me ask, how can I help? What's the best way to do things? What do we want our kids, young Oregonians, to understand, appreciate, and love? It taught me that seeking to understand the natural world is the first step in its preservation. And in that same vein, outdoor school pushed me to inspire. During my time as a staff member, I heard many, hey, wow, this is the first time I've ever seen a deer, the first time I've ever identified a tree or been on a hike. And each and every aha moment put a grin on my face and provided me a deeply honest satisfaction because I have been convinced that the work I've done is meaningful and powerful. And I couldn't count the number of times that I've seen surprise on a teacher's face when I tell them how well one of their most difficult students did on field study, how they were engaged and excited and were using their energy to draw in their friends and look for clues in the forest. Because at outdoor school, success is not measured by the scores of a Scantron test or by who can sit in their seat the longest without making a sound. Success is measured by the community that we create and the connection to nature that we all have but are sometimes barely aware of. Outdoor school is one of the last wholesome places left in education. It provides an umbrella for a sometimes disturbing reality. It allows for students to succeed outside the conventional setting for learning, and it exchanges the material for the natural and exchanges a fascination of video games and pop culture for a fascination of nature. And it teaches love and acceptance that isn't exclusive to outdoor school. And sometimes, as students return home, those values quietly permeate our communities and fill us with pride to be from Portland, Oregon. The future deserves a week of outdoor school. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Bethany Thomas, Thomas. And I'd like to just say that I support everything that Martin just said very much. Also, thank you for allowing me the chance to speak with you guys tonight. I'm also here to speak about how important outdoor school is for people of all abilities. My name is Bethany Thomas, and in 2005, I co-founded a nonprofit that aims to connect students to the natural world. The nonprofit is ECO, which is an acronym for Ecology in Classrooms and Outdoors. And in order to meet our mission of connecting students to the natural world, we bring a series of hands-on ecology lessons into elementary schools in the Portland metro area. So we're in 4 PPS schools right now this year, actually. And all those lessons are aligned with standards, next generation even. The reason that I do the work that I do and the reason that I started ECO is because of my experiences with outdoor school. And before I tell you more about those experiences, I just wanted to mention that since ECO was founded in 2005, we've brought experiential ecology lessons to over 14,000 students and worked closely with 450 teachers, which in itself is quite a ripple effect and speaks to what outdoor school can do. So I attended outdoor school as an 11-year-old. I was a student leader 5 times during high school, and while in college I volunteered 4 weeks as a SNEED. A SNEED is an adult volunteer who spends his or her time working specifically with one student who is at outdoor school and has special needs, hence SNEEDs. These special needs students span the gamut from physical to social to behavioral difficulties, and they just need an extra hand to be successful during their week at outdoor school. I wanted to just share a brief and very typical story about a 6th grade girl with special needs that I worked with years ago. Her name was Shaniqua. She was well liked by her peers, though often had difficulty controlling her emotions and maintaining appropriate behavior in school and learning situations. And just to back up something that Martin said, there are so many opportunities where kids who don't thrive in that school environment do so well in the outdoor environment. So this particular instance with Shaniqua, we were walking to a water resource station at Camp Howard, and a fellow classmate said something that kind of rubbed her the wrong way. I think it was about a hairbrush. But at any rate, it upset Shaniqua, and her response began to derail the group. But because I was there as a SNEED, I was able to take her aside, walk a different path to get to the water resource station, and this allowed her time to calm down and be able to regroup and be a positive contributor. It allowed her group to refocus back on what the student leader's instruction was, just while Shaniqua was recentering. And there were similar situations to this that occurred throughout the week. It is really just kind of your typical story. But all in all, it helped Shaniqua to have a successful experience at outdoor school. And I would just like to let you all know that SNEEDs make it possible for students of all kinds of abilities to really thrive and have successful times at outdoor school.
Great. Thank you very much.
Is it possible to bring this?
Do you want to give us something?
Yeah,
Sure.
can I do that?
Thank you.
Patrick Manigan and Scott Fogerty. Rick Till.
You can go ahead.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Scott Fogerty, Fogarty. I am currently the Executive Director with Friends of Trees. And I also serve on a committee that is looking for statewide funding for outdoor school. I'd like to say that I'm personally very fortunate to have had parents who, when I was at a very young age, took me out into the woods and taught me what nature was about. I gained a very spiritual connection to nature at a very young age, and I feel very fortunate for that. But unfortunately, that doesn't obviously happen with a lot of families and a lot of people, not just in the Portland metro area, but throughout the state of Oregon and unfortunately in the United States. And I believe the outdoor school program has huge social and educational benefits that can and cannot be quantified per student or compared to tests, as our previous testimonial mentioned. I am not from Oregon, and like Martin and Bethany, I did not have the opportunity to go through outdoor school. But again, I feel fortunate that my parents were able to give me that opportunity. My last job, I was the executive director at the Opal Creek Ancient Forest Center. And while there, we brought in groups from all over the country to look at what an ancient forest looks like, which, if you know, there are not many left in the United States and in the Northwest. And we were fortunate to have a Jane Goodall Environmental Middle School program in Salem that brought up a group from inner city Oakland, California. And you can imagine the makeup of the students, 90% of whom parents were either incarcerated, addicted, or not living anymore. And they showed up at the gate in a forest that they had never had an opportunity to see before. And, were not really engaged with what they were doing. We hiked into the education center, and they spent 5 days there. And there was a sea change after about the third day, with no electronics, with no connection to the outside world, with the ability to see what a true natural system looked like and what it meant to not just them, but the entire planet. And I'm happy to say that on the way out, they were rapping about tree voles and Douglas firs and other things. So they were using their skills that they already had, integrating skills, being outdoors in an environment that they had never been exposed to previously, and having a lifelong, I think, change. I like to think that. We never followed up, but I like to think that Jane Goodall inspires a lot of people, and that had an effect. Bringing it back to here in the Portland metro area, I think that is true at a grassroots level across the board in our education system. in this area. And I've had the opportunity to visit some of the outdoor school centers, such as the Collins School out in the Sandy River, and there's just great things that are going on. There's restoration opportunities. There, within an hour from here, there are opportunities to see what a true natural system looks like, which I believe helps inspire children to become greater individuals to our society, because they learn about what a system like that is, and that which we've lost a lot of, but they can gain a lot of interpersonal and spiritual connections to that. So I'm here on behalf of our committee to ask you to fund a full week-long program. I would say 2 weeks, but I know that's not there, but 5 days minimum for kids to go out and experience these kinds of things that we have right here on our back door, that we don't have to go that far for, and it doesn't really cost that much. So we're going to be working on behalf of kids at the state level, and I would encourage you to be leaders to help those legislators who are not in the Portland metro area understand the value of these type of opportunities. So thank you all very much for your time.
Thank you. Do you want to call the ones who did not come down, just to make sure that they didn't arrive late?
Yes. Patrick Manigan and Rick Till, Ephraim Macon.
Okay, great. No, not directly. I think they
Because
just.
they got that point,
Yeah,
they have
it
the
just came out.
legislative
Right.
thing, yeah.
Right.
Mhm.
We
Are
could
we
certainly
going to
talk
allow
about it.
that?
We could certainly bring it up and talk about it, sure. Okay, again, thank you, everybody. If there's anything that you need to speak further with us about, please speak to Roseanne right over here, or you can contact us through board email or telephone. So now, we're going to move forward with the resolution for No One Eats Alone Day. I think our students were here to talk to us about that a little bit earlier. The board is proposing that we declare February 13th as the official No One Eats Alone Day. By making this declaration, PPS will become the largest school district in the nation to have all of its K-8 and middle schools participate in this national campaign led by the nonprofit organization Beyond Differences. This student-led lunchtime initiative is a standalone event that takes place during lunchtime at school. During No One Eats Alone events, students make a difference at their own school by making sure that everyone is included at lunch and students sit with new friends and classmates. Superintendent Smith, do you have anything further you want to say about this?
No, just to thank the students who came and spoke on behalf of this. That was wonderful to have student testimony and like student leadership making this happen in our schools. So thank you to our students.
Great, thank you. Okay, the board will now consider Resolution 5011, National No One Eats Alone Day. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Director Belisle moves and Director Morton seconds the motion to adopt Resolution 5011. Ms. Powell, is there any citizen comment on this?
There is none.
Of course, we already heard from our students, which is great. Any board discussion? Director Belisle?
I'm just really excited that we're doing this. This is a great statement at our level to talk about the challenging issues that schools and students in schools are challenging, and a great way to identify social isolation, that bullying is a problem and people are becoming aware of it and finding tools, but just also a great reminder of that social isolation. As the students said, you know, it's easy to see students who are alone in the cafeteria, and it's a really challenging skill set for students to come forth and to break that barrier and to talk with students. As the one student mentioned, that the students are just like everybody else. We're all looking for connection, and so I'm excited to support this, and I just appreciate the students taking it on themselves to play their part in this.
Yeah.
The student-led piece is great.
Others? No? Okay, well, I'll just personally thank the students that were here and the other students who are involved in this this effort, because it's great. Okay. The board will now vote on Resolution 5011. All in favor, please indicate by saying yes.
Yes.
All opposed, please indicate by saying no. Any abstentions? No. Resolution 5011 is approved by a vote of 7-0, and I'm sure our student representative would be voting in favor as well, if she were here. So, Our next agenda item is an update on supplemental transportation plan. Superintendent Smith, would you like to go ahead and introduce this?
I would, and I'll introduce Tony Magliano, who's our Chief Operating Officer, and Justin Fallon-Dollard, who is our Project Manager, who will present you with the supplemental transportation plan. Tony.
Good evening, Superintendent Smith, Chair Knowles, Board of Directors. My name is Tony Magliano, Chief Operating Officer. Tonight I'm here to introduce an informational item to the board on work we've been doing to update our 1991 Supplemental Transportation Plan. We're required to have an Oregon Department of Education approved plan in order to receive reimbursement for transportation associated expenses. The update to this plan is a 3-year effort. We're about halfway through it. It's in collaboration with Portland Bureau of Transportation's Safe Route to Schools program. In doing this work, we've developed a geographic information system data model, which helps us inform, but that model also can be used to support other district-wide decision-making processes. I want to introduce Justin Fallon-Dollard, who works in our facilities department, who is the subject matter expert in this area, who will take the board from what we've been doing, what the plan is, and what the step ahead is for us. So, Justin.
Great. Good evening, members of the board and Superintendent Smith. I'm going to kind of walk you through supplemental transportation within the district and why we're doing an update, and then we'll drill down to the exciting details of GIS. What is supplemental transportation? It's non-mandated bus service within student walk areas. So if you're in a K-5 or K-8 school site, that's a 1-mile walking radius. If there's hazards present and we don't expect you to walk to school, we'll provide bus service. If you're in a 6-8 or 9-12 school site, it's a 1.5-mile walking radius. So the state of Oregon, ODE, expects students living within those walk radiuses to be walking to school unless there is a physical hazard or a student has a health issue. In order to provide the bus service and to be expected to be reimbursed, the supplemental transportation needs to be approved through a plan. We receive 70% reimbursement of that cost. So let's kind of walk through how that works. So this is the Riki School site. You'll see it right here next to Wilson. This is the enrollment boundary for Riki. So again, there's the enrollment boundary in the kind of the pinkish salmon color. That's the 1-mile walking radius that serves Riki. On the right-hand side, you'll see a slightly shaded out area here. That's the area that's been identified by PPS Student Transportation as being an area that has walking hazards. So students living within that area are eligible to receive supplemental transportation. And there are the students in that area. So, almost half of the students living within the walking radius of Riki could be eligible to receive supplemental transportation based on hazardous conditions. Why do we need a plan update? Well, our current plan dates to 1991 and no one can find it, so that's kind of an issue.
Wow.
There's been numerous infrastructure changes since that time, demographic changes, and certainly neighborhood changes. So it's time to update the plan.
Just a quick question.
Sure.
So half the population is eligible, what actually use it?
Well, we'll get to that when we get to drill down at the GIS. It turns out not everyone uses it, mostly because of infrastructure changes, but also some cultural barriers to walking. So we had some project goals, which is to develop existing conditions mapping across the entire district. We really want to understand what's going on in those walk areas. We want to identify where supplemental transportation is actually required. So currently, we're providing supplemental transportation where it might no longer be required because there's been changes to infrastructure. Sidewalks have been put in, or other means to make for safe routes to school. We want to identify potential infrastructure equity concerns. We know that not all households are adequately served by city resources, including access to sidewalk networks in the city, so we want to identify where that's happening. And we also want to develop equity-based plan support with PBAR Safe Routes to Schools. It's targeted resource allocation through the city called plan support. So that's aligning resources from the city to where it's most needed within the district. However, currently, city policy doesn't necessarily align with our equity policy. We'll talk more about that in just a minute. Yes?
Could you tell us what the last sentence means?
Sure.
Equity-based plans support.
Yeah, so equity-based plan support is working with the city to identify where resources should be targeted based on our equity policy, our district equity policy, which says that students, historically underserved students, could be receiving additional resources to create a better learning environment for them, or looking at student walk areas, a better student walking environment for them, so that when they're coming to school, they're not encountering barriers to walking, and their walking to school promotes community health. So as we get into the presentation a bit longer, we'll get into the detail of that. So how will students benefit from this update? We're going to have healthier kids who are ready to learn because they're walking to school, exercising their bodies and their minds. Safer neighborhood streets for all residents. We want to have thriving neighborhoods that foster community. You can walk around and get to different places that you need to do, run errands, meet your neighbors, go to school meetings. An opportunity for physical activity for kids who need it the most. Fundamentally, what we want are safer routes to school for all children, so children who could be otherwise walking to school within a 1 mile or 1.5 mile walking radius are doing so. More kids walking means less bus service. Less bus service means more money going back to school sites rather than to operations. So we came up with a project approach. The first is a quantitative data model of existing conditions. So we're using geographic information system and engineering analysis. Why are we doing this? Because the city does not have a GIS data model that can support our needs as a school district. They can't tell you what's going on in the walk areas across the city because it's not maintained. Even though the data is available, they haven't had the resources or initiative to actually construct a GIS data model. Additionally, they don't know where our students are located. We know that. The city also does not have a complete engineering analysis of PPS student walk areas. So this is a big subject of discussion right now at the city, is the fact that there's all these areas that lack sidewalk or proper infrastructure or crosswalks. Presumably there might be some resources available through city policy, but no one's quite sure where the money should go beyond looking at maybe East Portland should receive it because it came into the city later when it was annexed. So one of the things we look at on creating a quantitative data model are known barriers that can actually be mapped. They're identified. This includes no sidewalks, high-speed traffic, truck routes, students having to cross 4 lanes without a proper flagged intersection or crosswalk, freeways, and then rail, both max rail as well as freight. So one of the things we always have to look at is that any quantitative data model really needs to approach some level of accuracy, because I think we can easily get confused by math or presume that there's a magic to math that gives us the right answer. And we know that there's lots of ways to approach the environment that's around us. Yes?
Could you go back to that last slide?
Sure.
So you're saying that the city of Portland doesn't have a GIS system that can map those things?
Not comprehensively.
And comprehensively, you mean what?
That means we actually take all those factors together and weigh it to where students are located and where the school site is to identify safe routes to school.
So they don't have the student overlay, but they do have, one would assume that they would have that.
They have the data, but they also don't have the analysis methodology to arrive at where those safe routes might be. We've actually been building that.
And do they have it for, do they use something like this for their own citizens, of which most of us are?
They don't.
Okay. I'll refrain from.
We'll get you there. Hang on. Okay, so one of the things we look at is the data collection, what's available here in Portland. So we're drawing from Multnomah County, Washington County, Metro, and City of Portland data. We stack that all up to make sure that there's actually some alignment between what we know to be out there. What's the quality of the data? That required actually a fair amount of doing field checking at a number of demonstration project sites. What's the detail of the data? How recent is it? What can it tell us about the conditions? What kind of analysis can be supported by it? What are we going to do with the data? And then fundamentally, what is our methodology or approach? As you all know, methodology or approach can influence outcomes for better or for worse. Then we want to combine that with a qualitative data model of existing conditions. That's actually asking people how they walk, what their perceptions of their walking environment, how do they get to school. We want to do that through a combination of surveys, open houses with the community, targeted community walks, as well as crowdsourcing. So we really want people to tell us, how do you get to school? What do you think about when your kid walks to school? This is important for a couple of reasons. There are cultural barriers to walking. This includes necessity or custom. Walking to school doesn't work for the family. It could be an economic issue, it could be a faith issue. There is a fear perception. My student lives in a high crime area. I don't want them walking to school. We also actually encountered recently in North Portland, in George community, there was a fear of deportation. My son or daughter could be picked up, held for potential deportation, or lead to my family, and members of my family could be deported. There's also the perception that walking to school is unsafe, which is something we encounter a lot, but there's also the perception that walking to school is socially unacceptable. Just recently, about 2 weeks ago in Silver Spring, Maryland, a family lost custody of their children temporarily because they let their 10-year-old son and his 6-year-old sister walk 1 mile from school to their house. The police picked them up, interrogated the parents, filed a report with Children's Services in Maryland, and then went through a long process. The parents went through a long process of being accused by the state of Maryland of neglecting the children. The sad irony is that one of the parents is a climate scientist for the federal government who focuses on climate change and reducing greenhouse gases. So the qualitative data must be inclusive. Stakeholders should be empowered when providing data to update the plan. So when we're reaching out to the community, we want them to feel like they're actually informing decision-making both made by the district and by the city. It needs to be culturally relevant and language specific. So we're going to be engaging across multiple ethnic communities based on language. We have 5 major language groups that the district engages with. Targeted outreach needs to reach to historically underserved students and their families. I think most of you are familiar with this, but let's present the definition anyways that's used by the district. The state labels these groups as disadvantaged students. Here at PPS, we describe them as historically underserved, and that includes economically disadvantaged, English language learners, students with disabilities, Black, Hispanic, American Indian, Alaska Native, and Pacific Islander students. So those are the historically underserved students and their families that we especially want to make outreach to, often underrepresented in community processing. So part of the next part of the project approach is to achieve consensus with the community at large. So we want to identify those infrastructure gaps, right? Tell us where it's difficult for your son or daughter to walk, whether that's physical or cultural perception. Equity concerns, so we can actually help channel funds towards overcoming those. And then align our city policy and capital funding with PPS equity policy. So it's going to go back to the plan support when I talk about this. We want to make sure also that all schools are included when we have this discussion about plan support. So this is currently the City of Portland's model for plan support. Equity is weighted at 40%. Past expenditures at 30%, and safety at 30%. So capital funding decisions made by Portland and PBOT Safe Routes to Schools is equity weighted. Not too dissimilar to what we do as a district when looking at directing resources to needs. Currently, only 21 schools are included in that decision matrix that's equity weighted, so that's an issue. No middle schools are included, no high schools are included. So these are our project phases: an intergovernmental agreement, which the board had considered in June of last year, GIS and engineering, stakeholder engagement, which taken together with the quantitative model will give us a complete model of all the walking areas. We'll come up with a supplemental transportation plan and plan support with PBOT as partners, present that to the board. Upon approval then, that goes to ODE for approval. And that directs how we provide supplemental transportation. So we'll talk about where we're at right now. An intergovernmental agreement was entered into with the city back in June, which you all approved. It aligns city policy and capital funding with PPS equity policy. It prioritizes safe routes to schools, especially for our bond program, and promotes greater resource sharing. Those resources right now are looking at a coordinated effort between PPS and PBOT Safe Routes to School. That's an error on my part. That should say PBOT Safe Routes to School for coordinated analysis of existing conditions. So we're really working together as partners to understand what's happening out there on the street. Now comes the fun part, GIS Data Model. So our data model is looking at school enrollment and boundary and populations, which I showed to you a little bit earlier. We're looking at transportation-related infrastructure, student walk area conditions, hazard bus service, which we noted earlier at Riki, potentially 50% of the students living within the walking area could be eligible for bus service, and then the locations of underserved students when we get to the issue of, or question around resource allocation based on equity concerns. So we built this data model, and we really wanted to make sure that it was robust, that it could be tested across different walking conditions. So we looked at Riki, which is in the Wilson cluster, which is basically hilly conditions, some unpaved streets. It has Barber Boulevard, Bertha Boulevard, Southwest Vermont, Capitol Highway, Forest Park, which is actually in the county, newer development in the county, Boise, Elliott, Humboldt, which has I-5, has the max crossings to take into consideration, as well as Fremont-Williams corridor, and Alberta and Killingsworth. And then the Lent School, which we get out to areas with Foster, Powell, I-205, Maxwell as well. So tonight I'm just going to go through Riki because it was one that really captures everything we're looking for. So Riki, as I mentioned before, there's high volume, high speed traffic on a number of different streets that are of an issue. There's limited connectivity with the network, which restricts routing. We have sloped and windy roads that can reduce visibility. Most sidewalks only occur on one side of the street, and there are unpaved streets. So we have two methodologies that we're using. One is a network analysis, which basically looks at how does a student get from point A to point B, and what are the impedances, what slows the student down or prevents a student from arriving at point B. So network analysis allows us to be comprehensive. We're just looking at point A to point B. It's dynamic. If the route changes between point A and point B, we can account for it. It's repeatable. We can use it across the entire district. Ideally, it's robust. It can be applied to all walking conditions, and scalable. So one example was Riki, which we actually based the model on and then scaled across the entire district. We also look at what's called a stream order, where we're filtering out routes that do not support walking to school. We capture the routes that serve the most students, because those potentially could be safe routes that are identified and resources allocated to. And then we basically create what's called a downstream order to the school site. Think of it as a watershed. You're just directing a flow of students down to a pond or a lake. So this is a little wonky. This is your network, and this is your stream order. They build off of each other. In yellow, we've just said these are the areas you should avoid. Red means at all costs, never go into those areas. This is I-5. This is portions of Capitol Highway. And then the other areas are acceptable for potential walking conditions. But then we actually want to figure out how we can best get students there, so we start to order it. And the green shows the routes that would get students, the most students, to Riki School. So now we're going to drill this down to how that actually looks like when you do it in GIS. Okay, now I think this is the really fun part because it's graphics and not just me talking to a PowerPoint slide. Okay, back to Riki. All the students here are captured. They're either captured by blue dots or yellow dots. Blue dots are historically underserved students. So at Riki, it's around just short of 20, I think it's around 28% of the students would qualify as historically underserved within that entire category that I read off to you. This is looking at crime conditions. What we did is we actually got 10 years worth of crime analysis from the Portland Police Bureau, and we did a heat map. So what we're looking at is a heat map of crimes likely to occur when a student is either walking to school in the morning or returning from school in the afternoon and late evening, the likelihood of a crime to happen. Well,
And if it happened 10 years ago versus 3 years ago, does that matter on
it's
the map?
because this shows you a trend. So this is basically a trend line analysis shown as a heat map. So this big red dot up there, that's Oregon Health Science University. Most of the crimes up there actually are breaking into cars. This kind of orangey here, that's near Wilson. That's the Wilson parking lot. Same deal, breaking into cars. So if you get away from the breaking into the cars, Riki's actually pretty good. Most of the entire walk area is actually pretty good. We can provide greater details of the different crime categories, but Riki, compared to a lot of other school sites, is doing pretty good in terms of walking to school safely based on crime, on trend lines in crime. Now the question comes down to, what is it like to walk in Riki? Well, as we've said before, we noticed that around the edges in this area, in the walk area, there's not a lot of sidewalks present. And the sidewalks are clustered here in the center because this is newer development from the 60s and 70s. Most everything else around it is predominantly from the 30s, 40s, and 50s, and it was also not incorporated into the city at the time, so sidewalks weren't required. We have plenty of bike racks that serve Riki, so students could potentially, from some areas, be biking safely into school. Now we look at some of our concerns around transportation in terms of vehicles. So there's I-5 and the big red line there. This is Capitol Highway. This is Vermont and Bertha. What we see at Capitol Highway is we have issues of high speed as well as vehicle crashes. We have high speed, oddly enough, coming across on Vermont right in front of Riki, even though there's speed bumps. Hopefully they're all getting tickets. This is all, by the way, from ODOT and PBOT monitoring data. And so we know that there's areas of concern at these particular intersections where high-speed traffic volume comes through, where students have to make crossings. And then the other issues where there might not be sufficient sidewalks for students. This translates then into our area that's shaded here as a hazardous zone and students that could receive busing. The yellow dots show you that those are the students who are actually choosing to take hazard busing. It's significantly less than the number of dots I showed earlier. So a lot of students are choosing not to take the buses. Either they're being driven in by their parents, or what we observed when doing field verification is they're walking because there have been changes to the infrastructure, improvements in the sidewalk area. So again, the blue shows us sidewalk on both sides of the street. Yellow is showing us on one side. These areas in brown are where there's actually no sidewalk present at all. Let's overlay that where we look at, again, here is your hazard area, and then going to our stream water, we can identify collector routes that, with not too much intervention on the part of the city, can be directing students safely to Riki. Potentially, we could be taking out almost all of the hazard bus service to Riki, except for maybe this little corner up here, because it would be difficult to route them unless we're willing to have them cross and walk down. And that still gets you within a 1 mile walking radius and in a timely manner. So this is something we can present to the city in terms of resource allocation and making decisions. Not every street needs to have sidewalks on both sides in a limited resource environment. We can create better walking conditions and crossings if we're targeting the resources. So again, side by side, here are the students that are choosing to take the bus in the hazard area. These students, many of them could be walking on collector routes. Next steps. So we need to narrow or eliminate data gaps in hazard bus service areas. Most of the hazard bus service areas identified by PPS student transportation are just kept on scraps of paper that are actually not mapped. So we need to go dig through that and go out in the field and try to map it better. So we have a gap in our data with that. When we bring an intern in to help us with that, and then Safe Routes to School will be doing that as well in the field. We want to do a final refinement of the GIS analysis methodology to include what's called sinuosity. That's just basically how curvy the road is. The University of Wisconsin at Madison has a civil engineering department that's very interested in doing a study with us to see if we can make a correspondence between sinuosity of the road and pedestrian safety. So actually we're in a research study with University of Wisconsin right now. We want to map the remainder of the district student walk areas. We're pretty close to having that finished. And then we want to develop a civic reporting tool which basically allows us to crowdsource
what's going on out in the field from the perspective of parents, students, and the community at large. And they can actually report back to PPS and PBOT, and we can actually then bring that reporting back into our GIS model. So that's combining the qualitative with the quantitative. Ideally, we'll be able to do that in multiple languages. We want to develop a community mapping web application so parents and families understand what's called their mode share. So they can actually map out for themselves, either on the computer, or if they don't have access to computer at school, or during an open house on paper, to understand what their entire commuting route is. A lot of families actually don't understand their entire commuting costs. And often how kids get to school is part of the entire family commute. It is for my family. We split it up between a combination of walking, mass transit, and a car. Finally, we want to make sure that we have stakeholder engagement that is inclusive, that'll occur this fall so we can get a complete understanding of how everyone thinks of their walking conditions and build a complete model that combines the quantitative and the qualitative. Thank you.
So the plan itself is pretty innovative in what it offers. I don't think any other district has thought about it in this way. Identifying those gaps and working with the city so that the city can apply resources to help meet our students' needs. The collaboration, and it's received a lot of favorable attention in a variety of fronts. So we're pretty excited about this. We got 1.5 years left, and there's still a lot of work to do, but we wanted to keep you up to date on where we are and what we're doing.
And this is not being done with any of the other districts that are within Portland?
No, we're the only district approaching this. And it turns out our GIS Data Model, which may be the only such model actually in the nation.
Ours? Developed by us?
That's correct.
That we're going to sell to other people?
Well, it's proprietary, but our IGA does make it available for PBOT Safe Routes to Schools so that other districts can utilize it. We don't want to be the big dog that eats all the bones.
Sure, I get it.
How much
Thank
of
you
this
very much, Tom.
is being tracked, contracted out versus in-house?
So the initial methodology was contracted out. We hired a GIS consultant to help us develop the methodology under parameters that I developed. At that point, there was a handoff when we hired a GIS specialist, a very talented one, and I'll call her out even though she's not here. Her name's Christine Rutten, and she's pretty awesome. And then we, at that handoff, she's then taken it a couple of steps further, looking at deepening and adding complexity that the contracting analyst wasn't able to solve for us, and she did.
But she's a PPS employee.
She is a PPS employee.
Director Buell.
How many of our schools now are in the same position as this Riki that we just saw on the map? In other words, how many do you have to map? You've got an awful lot of stuff done for Riki. How many of our, what do we have, 84 schools? How many schools do we have?
That's good.
So we have 84 school sites. 79 of them, though, are actually the ones that we are mapping because there are those. So we're not focus option schools are not included in it within that, or any charter schools or things like that. So we're looking at basically school sites that are regular K5, K8, 6-8, or 9-12. So because, like, for example, Benson doesn't serve a cluster. There's no school sites that would be included when we would look at mapping at Benson. So we're doing it by high school cluster. And then my count gets us to 79 school sites that would fall under the cluster analysis by high school cluster. We've actually have existing conditions mapping completed for all the entire district. The gap is the hazard bus service. We don't have that fully nailed down because we're still working down through the records that PPS Student Transportation has, and since that hazard bus service was done by an individual basis out in the field, and then routes adjusted accordingly, it hasn't been mapped. It's actually not put to a street level data that we're doing right now. So that's what we're working through next before we can say X number of routes are valid or receiving bus service that translates into X number of students. So we're still working that down.
Now, in terms of our budget, dividing it up, in the end, will we have enough money, do you think? Or are we going to have a proposal that meets all the criteria for all the children, so to speak?
Yes.
In other words, everybody who's in a spot that we deem as hazardous, would have a possible bus route? Is that, are we getting to the overall, everybody included, or are we making decisions on it? And I was curious on how, if we are making decisions, how the decision's being made.
So this will help us tremendously in informing us in how we make decisions on where it's safe to walk or not safe to walk.
No, I was talking about on who gets the hazards.
On who gets
who gets the bus service? How do we make decision on who gets the bus service? Part of it's on how unsafe or safe it is. Are we quantifying how unsafe?
We are.
It's a lot, and we are. Do we have? I mean, how do they end up? If everybody doesn't get that, how do we end up deciding who does? That's the question. I noticed there was an equity
I don't think we're
formula.
to that level that we know how many more buses we need or how many less buses we need. Buses flow through all these routes. It's possible that with existing transportation, we're able to adjust routes to provide it for our students. Of course, there's always the alternative that we could identify many areas where we should be providing transportation that we're not, and it could cause an increase in transportation costs, but I don't think we're at a point now where we can say
You're
what
not
that
there
is.
yet, but
Right.
someplace you're going to have to make that
Yeah,
decision.
exactly.
So the other question that I have, the third one, is this is incredible stuff from my point of view. I'm really safety oriented on things, and I really care about safety and child safety and stuff. And I was just curious if we're making a commitment in our schools to go along with this. We can have a safe bus route all we want or not, and we can figure it out, but if a kid walks on the wrong side of the street and is gonna get run over maybe. And we're not, I mean, I go all the time making turn downtown, say, to make a turn and the person isn't paying any attention. I'm riding down, and we're all doing that. You go down and people are kids or people are walking on the wrong side of the road. I mean, we used to get taught which side of the road to walk on. We used to get taught to look both ways. I would think, are we going to make an effort now to also have a health unit that teaches kids? Same with bike riding. You see kids bike ride across the crosswalk, which is A, against the law, and B, incredibly dangerous. I mean, are we doing something in health? You guys may not know that. I'm kind of directing this to the superintendent, too.
The Safe Routes to School program, for which we're partners with, actually provides pedestrian and bike safety education. And in the past, we actually, PPS secured a substantive grant from the Oregon Department of Transportation for safety education. And we actually employed both Safe Routes to School and the Bicycle Transportation Alliance to provide that education across 13 different school sites.
13?
Mm-hmm. But that's built on prior efforts at other school sites, and it's an ongoing thing. So under the IGA, all school sites now will be included in Safe Routes to School. In the past, it was only K-5, K-8, and 6-8, but most of the time it was only K-5 that was participating, and it was actually at the option of the principal to whether or not to participate. We've now made a commitment as a district that there's full participation in the program, which then will include pedestrian and bicycle education at the school site level. So that's built into the plan support, which I talked about before, when we start getting into these questions of what school sites would benefit from additional resources. So removing cultural and physical barriers requires, in a large part, education as well as actually making changes to our street network.
So are you saying that all of our children are going to get at some point in their health curriculum safety on how to transport
Well,
themselves?
not necessarily, and I can't speak to actually programming. I can only speak to what our actual policy is with PBOT Safe Routes to School.
So they'll get the training, Steve, but it won't be part of their health curriculum. Right, so.
There might be some sort of training that deals with this, with going to and from.
Right.
Could I get some information on that and see that we're hitting all of our children and what grades and so forth?
Yeah, I can provide our work to date on that.
That'd be great.
It's pretty comprehensive, and it's also available from the City of Portland. They publish surveys as well as prior efforts. I can send that along.
Thank you.
Other questions? Dr. Blau?
First, I just want to say this is really exciting. I can remember 3 or 4 years ago, actually, when I first started, hoping that we could do more GIS mapping because there's so much data and it's so rich and it can help us. And I appreciate hearing articulated the challenges that here's what we know. Now we have to go out and see if conditions have changed. Then we have to go see whether or not students are actually walking that route or if they're making. Like there are a lot of levels to get some kind of accuracy so that you can actually make a decision. So one, I just want to say I'm really excited. And I'm glad to hear that you're working with the city. And one of the questions I wanted to ask was, we had an agreement when we passed our bond for Safe Routes to School to do some kind of work. When you're talking about the 21 schools, is that part of that agreement?
That's correct. So the active transportation IGA, that's the very agreement you're referencing.
Correct. So
that brings in all of our schools into consideration for the capital funding decision matrix that PBOT uses.
Great, thank you. And then you explained why you chose the schools that you did, which I appreciated. But as I was just sitting here thinking about all the schools that have so many transportation challenges, many of them along the 82nd Avenue corridor, we've heard in the past couple of years people having challenges of crossing that and being worried. And I really appreciate that you brought up some of the faith issues or safety or cultural concerns, because I know that we have schools that are located in the heart of a of a neighborhood, but because of cultural reasons, they aren't comfortable with their elementary school student walking home after dark, and so they miss opportunities perhaps to stay after school and participate in activities, and it's a really real issue that I don't know, like a map or standing out on the corner you wouldn't see unless you actually engage people. So I'm excited to hear that. So thank you for going through that effort.
Thank you.
Others? Dr. Regan? Hi, thank you for the presentation. When I first saw the agenda item for supplemental transportation update, I was expecting that we were going to hear about our focus schools and some of our alternative schools where we offer transportation and kind of where we're at, what our current budget is, what we're thinking about, how we're going to address equity issues related to our focus schools. So, and obviously that wasn't part of this discussion. What is our current non-mandated bus transportation budget?
So the budget, I don't know off the top of my head, Bobby, but we do have a working group that we started that's looking at our non-mandated transportation and coming out with some recommendations for Carol with regard to how we support the focus schools, the immersion programs that are coming online, DLI. So we've begun that work. I could send you what our current costs are. You may have seen it before. There was a spreadsheet created by transportation that outlined all those non-mandated costs that we had.
I know it's been a subject that we've looked at, over many, many, many years on, especially as we were budget cutting, and we have cut out some non-mandated transportation. And clearly this looks like, in terms of the proposal tonight, you're proposing that we would increase supplemental transportation for safety reasons, and that is good and wise and appropriate. But I'm just trying to figure out when we're going to hear a discussion about supplemental transportation related to focus options and some of those equity concerns as well, because that seems like the other half of the discussion.
Yeah, and it seems like every year we get into a discussion with the community over what buses, services, and so that's why we formed, that's why we put this working group together to look at that and come up with some recommendations so that with equity in mind and, making sure students that need transportation are getting transportation.
So in terms of the work group, when are they reporting back?
So we've only had like 4 meetings so far. So we were meeting monthly. I asked Terry to actually bump that up so that my goal was to actually have it done by the start of this year, but we didn't make that timeline. So we're going to continue existing bus services through this upcoming year. And hopefully by the start of next school year, we have a plan to move forward with.
I do want to tie back in the GIS data model that we've created can be used to support that working group. And I'm actually serving on that group as well.
Okay.
So when we talk about a comprehensive model, it is comprehensive. What we're looking at is focused on what we talked about for kind of more of our quote-unquote regular school operation sites. We can actually model any school site or any program based on the student data. It's pretty simple to do within the model to plug that in and actually make an analysis.
Great. Thanks. So thank you for the information about the work group. I'm really happy to hear that you guys are ahead of that. That's great news. Director Atkins?
Thanks so much. It's just so exciting to see this huge leap forward for safe routes to schools. I mean, we've enjoyed this wonderful program for years, participated in the walking bus special days and know that it's been a great program, but just to see this huge leap both in terms of covering all our schools, but obviously what you're doing with the GIS, and I love the app and the crowdsourcing and everything else. So super exciting, and just can't wait to see this unfold. So thanks a lot.
Dr. Bilal?
Sorry, I just remembered a thought I had during your presentation, and I appreciate us wanting to share with local districts, but I also think that there might be an opportunity here for us to earn some income from the work that you guys have done. If this is something really that's ahead for districts across the country, I would imagine that folks, rather than take the investment that we just made, would appreciate actually purchasing something. So if there's that opportunity, I'd sure support that.
Revenue generation. I like that. Dr. Buell?
You have a large number of community forums that were listed. What are those about? Are we just showing people, or are we actually looking for some specific information or something?
Sure, that's a good question. Thank you for raising that. So we'll have 8 open houses by high school cluster, and then 3 targeted community outreach open house walking opportunities that we haven't decided where that's going to occur, and we'll work with PPS community involvement on that. So what we're going to be doing is just sharing what we know, and not with the presumption that we know those conditions absolutely. And we want folks to tell us what they know about how they walk to school and what those conditions are like. So by high school cluster, that means if you went to Jefferson for that open house, then there would be areas for each school site represented within the cluster to look at a really big map, as well as have smaller maps available for folks to actually draw and write on and tell us what's going on. We want to try to capture that in a way that we can actually scan it and bring it into our GIS model. But it's our opportunity to hear from the community to say, hey, this area is an area of concern for us, whether it's a street crossing, it's an issue with crime, or it's an issue where sidewalks are in poor condition that we didn't capture. And I fully expect to hear quite a bit of that to inform how we think about these walking conditions. Once that's taken in together across the district, we can actually then marry all of that into the quantitative model to get a comprehensive view of those walking conditions. So it's just marrying together straightforward data as it's reported out to us from public agencies, and then data that's reported back to us from our community at large and various stakeholder groups.
Dr. Morton?
2 quick things. One, to piggyback on Bobby's comment, I think when PBOT representatives came and spoke with us about the IGA, they did say that any PPS activities, educational activities that were happening in PPS buildings or outside of PPS buildings were included within that IGA. So I think that's may not be in this particular phase, but I think that needs to be phased in to give a broad picture of the safety and the safety of our routes to students' routes to schools. That being said, I think one thing that the city's efforts around the streets tax has shown us is really pulled the curtain back on areas within the city. You had mentioned, late incorporation. I mean, I don't know how many decades we'll be using that excuse for neighborhoods like Coley to actually get streets and sidewalks. But we also know that, frankly, the city doesn't have the resources it needs to both build streets and sidewalks that are needed and also maintain the ones that currently exist. So perhaps this is an opportunity for us to play a role in really defining those priority areas. And I think this IGA is one step, but it may behoove us to play a role in how do we create safety from the ground up, starting with our youth and the routes to schools on an everyday basis, and then plan from that point. So I think the timing is great, and certainly your relationship to and participation in the work with the city, I think is critical. So thank you for the information and the presentation tonight.
Others? Tom? No? All set? Great. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Tony, can you get
Okay,
somebody who really likes the data to come in?
Yeah.
Okay, our next agenda item is the second reading for our amended cafeteria. I'm going to add benefits plan, so everybody knows what that is. At our January 6th board meeting, a first reading was held on the amended cafeteria plan. After 21 days of being open for public comment, the board is ready to vote on the proposed amendments, which, of course, we know from our last meeting were required because of changes to the federal law. So the board will now consider Resolution 5012, adoption of amended board policy on cafeteria plan, policy 5.10.090-P, cafeteria plan. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
Director Atkins moves and Director Curler seconds the motion to adopt Resolution 5012. Ms. Powell, is there any public comment?
There is not.
Is there any board discussion on the resolution? The board will now vote on Resolution 5012. All in favor, please indicate by saying yes.
Yes.
Any opposed, please indicate by saying no. No abstentions. Resolution 5012 is approved by a vote of 6-0. Thank you. Fastest vote ever. Okay, now our next agenda item is our 2014-15 budget amendment number 2. So I will now recess the board and open the public hearing for amendment number 2 on the 2014-15 budget. The board first heard this item at our last meeting. Ms. Powell, do we have public comment on this?
We do not.
I will now close the public hearing and reconvene the board back into its regular session. The board will now consider Resolution 5013, Amendment Number 2 to the 2014-15 budget for School District Number 1J, Multnomah County, Oregon. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
Director Blau moves and Director Atkins seconds the motion to adopt Resolution 5013. Is there board discussion? Want me to go?
Sure. I'll go ahead.
Either one?
Yeah.
Somebody, which one?
Director
Curler.
Yeah, I'd like to make an amendment.
Like to move an amendment?
I would like to move an amendment.
Okay.
Bobby, do you have any?
Sure, you want me to read it?
Sure, go ahead.
This is sort of a joint effort,
Yeah.
so. So this would be.
Do we have copies of that?
And I think these copies are in the yellow folder, Tom, so if you
Oh,
want to read it
okay.
instead, feel free. You want to read it?
Go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is an amendment to amendment number 2 of the 2014-15 budget. And Tom had indicated in the last meeting that he was going to bring this forward, and then we ended up working on it together. On September 23rd, 2014, the school board passed Resolution 4961, acknowledging a positive upward revision to the beginning fund balance for fiscal year 2014-15. The board directed the superintendent to increase school staffing immediately, to invest in the school district's 3 priorities, 3rd grade reading, out-of-school discipline, and high school graduation, to make needed one-time investments that support improvement of outcomes for Portland Public Schools students and effective operations, and to increase Portland Public Schools' uncommitted contingency from 3.9% to 4.5%. So again, that was 4 months ago. Amendment number 2, which is what we're looking at tonight, to the 2014-15 budget, shows uncommitted contingency at 7% rather than at 4.5%. Board policy requires 3%, and we have an aspirational goal of 5%. In keeping with Resolution 4961, and given the severe and ongoing needs in our schools, the board directs the superintendent to bring the board a plan by February 10th that assesses the immediate, urgent, unfunded needs in our schools and commits the surplus contingency necessary to support school programs this spring and summer. The board anticipates that funds dedicated at this time would be for one-time expenses to directly support teaching and learning, and could possibly include increases to principals' consolidated budgets, FTE support for overcrowded classes, professional development, summer programs for struggling students, grades 6 through 8 enrichment supports, including theater sports programs, library and/or curriculum materials, technology for students and/or teachers, curriculum and/or musical instruments to support a K-12 music articulation, investments in career technical education curriculum or supplies, or other similarly appropriate investments urgently needed to support student success. As part of the assessment and expenditure plan, the board further requests the superintendent to communicate with principals and teachers, soliciting their ideas on how to make the most difference for student achievement outcomes this year with the surplus. So Tom moved and I would second.
So you just have to hang on just a second.
I just have sort of a technical question, not a
Go ahead.
substance question. So this is an amendment to Resolution 5013.
Yes.
Okay, so it's just, are you saying this would be a new set of recitals at the end, or some recitals?
No, it
and some
basically is
resolve?
saying that it basically is saying that the reserve would remain at 4.5, not 7%.
Right, but I'm just asking, would the text here be, some of it would be a recital and some would be a resolve? I'm just trying to understand where it fits into Resolution 5013.
Is there a place in the resolution that specifically calls out that 7%? I can't remember.
That says 4.5.
No. So at this point, I think it isn't the point here that that Directors Regan and Curler are asking the superintendent to go back and find or determine where this extra surplus money could be spent and report back to the board on that before we,
No.
or as we vote on this, is that right?
Right.
So we're voting on this tonight, and you're asking that that a section be included in here directing the superintendent to go back and spend 3.5, or what is that, 2.5%? Is that it, basically?
We passed a resolution on September 23rd directing the superintendent to have a 4.5% contingency. Nothing has changed since that time to indicate that there should be a 7% contingency, and in fact, on September 23rd, the superintendent and staff actually asked the board at that time to increase the contingency to 6%. We had a budget work session on September 16th about this issue, about the ending fund balance, where we had about a 2-hour discussion. There were 4 board members there. On September 23rd, we had another maybe 2-hour discussion about the ending fund balance again. There was an amendment to keep it at 3.9. It went down 3 to 3. There was an amendment to keep it at 4. That went down 3 to 3. Then there was an amendment to increase it to 4.5%. So as far as I knew, that's what our ending fund balance or beginning fund balance would be. So what we're saying is we'd like to continue there. We had 4 hours of discussion on this, and we all came to that decision.
So I understand all that, Director Regan. What I'm asking isn't the point that you want a section in here saying that you're directing the superintendent to go back and find what to do with 2.5?
By February 10th.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's all.
Yeah, so,
I remember all that very
back
well.
by
Thank you for letting us know again, though.
correct, so it's, the bottom line is that if we pass this resolution, this language here that says, having held a public hearing, the board hereby amends budgeted expenditure appropriate.
What are you looking at?
Under the resolve.
The
number 1.
resolution.
Okay, thank you.
So it's going to replace this resolve.
Finding it.
It's in there.
And did I just hear a no out in the audience?
It's not going to be included in the recital, it's just,
Pardon me?
I'm just trying to get the actual amendment that we would vote on.
Yeah, we're just
We
trying to
don't have
clarify what the
this.
wording is that you're looking for here. It's not,
Because we can't discuss it until we have an actual amendment.
So
So
can we
let's
ask-
have the amendment first, the language that we would actually.
Do you want to
have.
get clarification from the finance staff?
Yeah,
Sure.
I'm happy to do that.
Yeah, come on up and ask.
If I could, can I get a copy of the? So I apologize, Director Curler, for interrupting with a no.
No, it's
But,
helpful. Thank you.
It's important that if you're voting on this resolution today, it's important for a number of reasons that the resolved part in here.
In where?
In your existing, in the
Okay.
original.
5013.
Okay.
In the resolution in your packet. It's important that you vote on that and that we amend the budget today because we've got a whole bunch of things that you've put in motion. I think, if I could venture to suggest, I think what you want to do is to add a second resolved clause that says,
Starts with the board directs the superintendent.
yes.
So a resolution 2, correct?
Right, and I'm sorry, I'm reading this.
I hope this doesn't add confusion, but I would think an easier way to do it would be actually to approve the amendment as is, and then to make a motion with this being its own resolution for it to come back. But I don't know if that.
you mean to approve Resolution 5013 as a
5103
standalone?
as a standalone,
And then have the proposed amendment from Bobby and Tom be a standalone.
I don't think it really matters.
That doesn't matter. I mean, that works for me, if it works.
I
David,
think
does
it would
that?
be easier than trying to meld the wording all
You do a
together,
second
given
one.
that you've got a specifically crafted resolution here, and then we could have a separate discussion about either way.
I don't think it makes any difference. I mean, this is not all going to be included, it's what we actually want, the amendment.
It's the
to
one
stay.
paragraph, the in keeping
Yeah.
with Resolution 4961, and given the severe and ongoing needs, the board directs the superintendent to bring the board a plan by February 10th that assesses the immediate, I mean, I think it's that paragraph, that's the action you're directing.
And the last paragraph, too, as well. as
And
as
the
part
last,
of that.
okay, so then the
Yeah.
two, so that it's like a resolution, that's
Yeah.
those,
So-
those are the resolution
That's
part?
in there too.
Yeah.
Where's the actual language about 7% though? and
Well, it says the surplus
4.5?
contingency, so we can say 4.5 versus 7%.
So I think what you could do is, I think I heard this suggested, you could pass resolution, I don't know what number this resolution, your actual resolution is, because I've got X's on
5103.
5.
103.
5013.
So you could
5013.
you could vote on 5013 and have a second motion that had, you've got, the first paragraph on this would be A, the second paragraph would be B, the third paragraph would be C in terms of recitals, and then what is currently the third paragraph here, in keeping with,
Right.
would be resolved 1, and then the as part of would be resolved 2. And that would, I think, accomplish what you are looking to accomplish.
And why don't we just do it as one, what's the reason not to do it just as one resolution? And that, so that
David,
we're amending it?
Isn't there a section in this resolution, and I don't know what it is, that specifically calls out the 7%?
No, the resolution.
And it wasn't called out in the meeting last week until Director Curler brought it up.
Well, it was on a PowerPoint.
It wasn't, there was never, the 7% was not in the PowerPoint.
Yes, it
Yes, it
I
was.
I beg your pardon, but one of the slides.
It was not called out.
Doesn't matter.
One of the slides had a picture of the contingency that
Yeah.
said uncommitted contingency 35.5 million, 7% of total expenditures. That was.
So might I suggest that we look at this and put, I think, what is it, the second paragraph? the third paragraph and the fifth paragraph, and find a way to just make those either recitals or the resolution. I think
I think that makes
this
sense
one.
to make it part of the resolution.
So could I withdraw my amendment and do this again?
Well, as long as you're a person who seconded it.
You started it. Would you like to withdraw? And we'll start again.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think it was,
Okay.
yeah, Tom's amendment, yeah.
So here's what the amendment would say now. And under resolution number 2, would say, in keeping with resolution 4961, and given the severe and ongoing needs in our schools, the board directs the superintendent to bring the board a plan by February 10th that assesses the immediate, urgent, unfunded needs in our schools and commits a surplus contingency, so that was 7% versus 4.5%, a 2.5% piece, necessary to support school programs this spring and summer. As part of the assessment and expenditure plan, the board further requests the superintendent to communicate with principals and teachers, soliciting their ideas on how to make the most difference for student achievement outcomes this year with the surplus.
That's your proposed amendment?
Yes.
So
Does it have a second? Before we discuss it?
I'll second that
You
amendment.
second
It would just-
it. Now we
yeah.
can discuss it.
So
Okay.
I have a clarifying, I'm still making sure I'm
Okay, go
understanding.
ahead.
So we're on 5013, we have 2 new resolves. Number 2, which is the former paragraph 3,
Mhm.
and number 3, which is the former final paragraph.
Yes.
Got it, okay, thanks.
So it goes, those are resolves, or those are recitals?
Those are
Those are recitals or
resolves.
resolves, okay.
Okay. So, couple questions. So it says this spring and summer. I guess I think my fundamental issue with this is not with the notion of wanting to find ways to invest this additional resource. For me, it's a balance of that plus the many uncertainties that we're facing in terms of going into a new biennium, PERS case, funding full day kindergarten, and all the rest. So I think staff sent us a memo because understanding those different uncertainties. So there's the uncertainty piece, and that's why we have contingencies or reserves. But there's also the piece of the fact that we're going into very soon, right now, we should be going into our budget process for this coming year. So when it says spring and summer, summer would be the next fiscal year. So I guess,
2 weeks.
yeah.
Summer's 2 weeks.
So I certainly would be willing to support some of the 2.5% to go into some immediate short-term, but the whole amount, given the uncertainties we're facing and the fact that we are just heading right into the budget season when we would be looking at that available funds and figuring out what we want to do with it, that's what makes sense more sense to me. The other piece is this question of one-time and ongoing as well. We've got a mix of one-time and ongoing that we already, this laid out here, that we already committed to this past fall. And it's a question I think we were going to bring up during the 15-16 budget process, whether those one-time would continue or not. And so that's part of what we have potentially committed to already, that those contingency funds would go to. So then this would be a new set of potentially another mix of some new one-time and new ongoing.
Or
to
just
be
one-time.
determined. Or, that's what I said, a mix of new one-time or new ongoing. But it's sort of adding a new mini spring budgeting process onto our existing this year's budget and next year's budget process. So I guess, I'm not in support of spending down this far. I'm certainly in support of looking at if there are some things we're already doing that we have just run out of money for, if schools are out of paper, things like that, absolutely. But to me, I don't support this extreme approach. That's where I'm at with it.
Others? Dr. Morton?
So I think I can kind of echo Ruth's concerns. Maybe we separate a little bit. I think the time frame for me is there are going to be some investments that I don't want to, it may not be just appropriate for this year or this spring and summer, but in fact, depending on the way the investment looks or is, it could actually go into the fall or go into a time later. I don't know, I don't have a scenario, but I can imagine that there would be a scenario where that kind of investment would be needed and would get to the things that are addressed in the other pieces. I would be comfortable with the language, primarily because we talk about, we want to see something from the superintendent on February 10th. We want to see an assessment and a plan with with the intentions of communication and gaining evidence from our stakeholders. With that, I would be okay with crossing out in this, the first one of the new resolves, the last two words, spring. I would just say to support school programs, period. And then in the last line of this, the second proposed resolve, I would just say different, ideas on how to make the most difference for student achievement and outcomes. You could say with the surplus, but I would probably cross out this year again, because I don't want to anticipate that it's only a short-term investment if we have an opportunity for this investment to go from tomorrow to next holiday.
So just to simplify.
Director
Thank you, sorry. Yeah, I was the last of 6 trolls in there.
You just have to jump in, you don't
Yeah.
wait. Yeah, I get it. I totally understand that, yeah, it's okay.
The bottom line for me is we've had a budget. There's an aspirational goal of 5% contingency. We spent a lot of time on the 4.5, and now there's new revenue. So what this does is it calls the question saying, what are, and on our last budget when we kept 4.5% and we did not invest in a lot of things that were needed. And so this calls the question saying, what is needed that now that we have some extra revenues, we can fund? And of course, it's always going to be in the context of this year's budget and next year's budget as well. But I think it's really important that that we take the time because there are things that we can do today that will matter a lot. And I am a total proponent of prudent reserves, absolutely 100%. But I also think there's something called imprudent reserves, and that is if we have some money and we have some needs that we can address right away that aren't getting met. It's a lot like the climate change debate, where a ton of CO2 that we reduce today is worth a lot more than if we reduce it 2 years from now. Same thing with our kids in education. So if we have the resources, which clearly now all of a sudden we have more than we had in our last budget, we ought to be taking a very hard look at what's really needed. And so this is calling the question and then asking the superintendent, who's got her pulse on it, to come back and say, okay, this is what I think we should do. It's asking you to make sure, which you would do anyway, but it's just putting in writing, to check with the principals and the teachers. I'd like to see an email go out to all the teachers, because I think we might actually get some ideas and maybe urgent needs that we wouldn't necessarily know of. So that's what this resolution, this amendment does.
Director Atkins?
So thanks for that. So another question, just in terms of the kind of outreach and communication and solicitation process. So, with anything, it's always that balance of how quickly can you move, since there are urgent needs, and I'm hearing you urgently want to get this money out the door, versus wanting to take the time to hear from the teachers and the community and the parents and the students about how they think it should happen, while at the same time engaging those same folks in a discussion about our 15-16 budget. And it really would be almost at the same time, or sort of a parallel. So I guess that's a question for you all. I mean, what's your comfort level? Because
send an email out to all the teachers asking them, and Carol knows how to communicate with her principals really easily. So
and actually, we're already in the process of communicating about next year's budget.
But we're not talking about a series of forums and
no. This is quick.
Yeah,
this is a quick.
and we're going to get. It's going to be quick. We're going to get quick ideas. We heard some from
$10 million.
Susan.
$10 million.
We're talking about
$10 million,
today.
we're not talking about an entire budget process of
No.
$550 million. We're talking about $10 million. We're
Yeah.
talking about one-time kind of things that can have some impact.
What we did when we had 16 million.
Yeah.
We did a lot of community outreach for $16 million.
So.
And, you know, Wayne, and, you know, again, this is where the superintendent gets to.
So the superintendent's going to pause the 15-16 budget process for a
Not
couple weeks?
necessarily.
No.
Okay, I'm just
Yeah, there's
checking out.
something called parallel tracking, which can happen.
She's got a lot of parallel tracks, so we're adding a new one.
She can multitask.
I do, but I'll keep going on our
Yeah.
long line. And some of this connects. I mean, some of the things that we're talking about that could happen earlier, I'll be able to put something together for you by the
So
10th.
then there's still, I guess I still have a concern about the one-time piece versus ongoing. There definitely could be things in here that could be one-time, you know, the paper as in the obvious example, or the musical instruments or the books. But if it were a staffing piece or a program, pardon?
Go ahead.
If it were a staffing piece or a program piece, then again, that gets into that complexity of we bring it in, and then are we going to stop it, or are we adding that into the long list of things that we're saying that we've already committed to that are going to be charged against these, we know that we are going to have to draw down these contingencies in the 15-16 budget, because there's already a list of those things. So
So for what it's worth, in the original amendment, and I think I would continue this, it says the board anticipates the funds dedicated at this time would be for one-time expenses. So we're not trying to add to any ongoing expenses here, we're just looking at some one-time things.
But then,
So we're not
but you
talking
include
about-
FTE on the list, which then
Right, but the
implies
FTE,
would be one-time, short-term,
No.
temporary people?
well, I think when we were talking about FTE support for overcrowded classrooms, that's for this spring, and not
Meaning-
necessarily, I mean, 'cause
So
you're
not
not
ongoing?
necessarily- yeah,
Meaning
no.
hire temporary people that
Exactly.
are here for, okay.
Right.
And so then we also heard from Suzanne, our PAT partner, about what her suggestions were around special ed, set-aside dollars, EAs, the educational assistants, having substitutes. And
New teacher supplies.
How that works.
yeah, and professional development for teachers. So
And
So again,
consolidated
the
budget.
superintendent would look at what is ongoing and what is one-time, and the expectation would be that these would be one-time expenses that we'd be talking about generally.
And we can structure the list in such a way that you still have the ability to accept some things, not other things. I mean,
Good.
yeah, we'll bring it in a way that you can see what would be ongoing and what's one time.
So, but we're locked in, I mean, again, given the uncertainties that we're going into a biennium, and we have no idea yet whether we're going to be even at current service level from the legislature, paying for full-day kindergarten, potentially having to refund the state based on the complexities of when they come back later and ask us, I don't know. I mean, that's, hopefully the kicker won't kick, but if God forbid it did,
It's going to.
that would be, I think, 23 million.
Ruth, just a couple.
I'm just being
Yeah. So just a couple, a statement and a question. First of all, if the kicker kicks, that's not the end of the world. It's kicking because revenues are up. Okay, let's just put that aside for a second. And then secondly is when you are, I wasn't here when the budget resolution talked about an aspirational goal of 5% when the board did that. So I'm assuming you were on the board when we did that. What was the reason, and how did we get there?
Bobby may have been.
Yeah, Bobby, I think
Bobby
that's really
probably
from
is.
Bobby and David's day back when things
Well,
were
I
really.
think, and I would also say that when we came up with a board policy, a requirement of a 3%, and I think there were some years where we didn't even get there. But our aspirational goal at that time of 5% almost felt pie in the sky, like a dreamland for us. So
Yeah,
to be now
that's
talking
right.
about 7% is, so go ahead.
Yeah, we in 2003, I think was when we passed this policy, and Director Regan and I came onto the board. At that point, we had virtually nothing
In reserves.
So 3% as a policy and 5% as an aspirational goal was
Oh, it was just a dream.
was way down the road in the future. So
And the fact
it was
that
it
with
was a
10
you
years
know
of
it was a
cuts-
starting point.
Yeah, with
at
10
that
years of
point.
cuts, we actually, the intention at the time was, we know we're in really rough times. When you really need a reserve is when you think things have a possibility of really tanking. And we need to, even in rough times, be building up that reserve to a reasonable level. we're in such a completely different place now with the economy pretty strong by most folks' estimates. And, we are not in the middle of any kind of teacher contract or other contract negotiations, so we know that we have some stability going into next year around that. I mean, there's just a whole variety of ways that we're in a better place. Our local option revenues are stronger. We know that we're getting another $5 million next year out of local option. I mean, there's so many different ways that our position right now is in a much better shape than we've had. I mean, when you want to be building onto the reserve is when you're expecting things to tank. And we know that we have a strong economy. We know the legislature is starting to reinvest in public education and in K-12. The co-chairs have come forward with a really reasonable starting point in terms of the state budget. We know it needs to be higher, but I mean, we're in better shape than we've been in years and years and years in terms of, the state wanting to and talking about reinvesting in education with the 40-40-20 and the governor's commitment, all of that. So when we were at a different place in 2003 than we are today. And today we're in a pretty positive place in general, and to be able to hit our aspirational goal or something close to that is just awesome. But we also have just incredible needs out in our schools and with our students, and when we have the opportunity to address them, we should. So I would say when staff came to us back in September and said, we want you to raise the reserve to 6%, it's the job of our financial folks to be conservative and to ask for a really high reserve. It's our job to look at the whole picture and say, yes, we want a really strong reserve, and we want to get money out to the field to make a difference in terms of student achievement. So, I mean, that's our job. And I respect the fact that you all want a big reserve. You should. You're our financial folks. It's our job to balance that and to say, yes, we need a strong reserve. And yes, as we look to the future, we also know that we have these incredible needs for our kids, and we can address some of that going forward. And we put it in the superintendent's hands to come back to us with that plan.
So some of this conversation reminds me of the same conversation that we have when we go to the legislature. And that is, when times are good, we should be putting aside for that rainy day fund. It's not when we think times are going to be bad that we put away, because there isn't anything to put away at that particular time. It's when times are good, I know we did. We scraped for that.
Right.
But now we have this larger amount, and I am happy that some of my colleagues feel so confident of the legislature. I don't feel that confidence. I saw that, anyone who saw the governor's budget would just wonder what the governor was thinking, because that budget would require all of us to cut.
Right.
And the co-chair's budget doesn't do that much better, especially if all of a sudden we have mandates that we have to meet, which will take out of our funding. I've been through those times in my 6 years on the board when we needed a $10 million amount.
Mid-year.
Wasn't that many years ago that we needed $40 million to make us whole, and we had to make cuts. Those are huge cuts for us. And so I hear the concern, I feel the urgency, but I also feel the urgency of making sure that we are being fiscally prudent so that come the fall or come the end of May or June, when we know what's coming from the legislature, we'll have a better idea of what our budget's going to be. I'm sorry those things don't line up. Well, that would be the best of all worlds, but they just don't. And I'm also very concerned about the kicker, because if it kicks, that $300 million will come out of the ending fund balance for this year, which will affect the beginning balance for next year, which means that the legislature will have to make that money up, and that could come from schools. So there are a lot of uncertainties out there that just make me really nervous about spending down even to the 4.5. Because I understand the urgency, and I think about some of our classrooms are overcrowded. The fact that some of our schools are running out of paper is just unconscionable. I'm interested in seeing what the superintendent has to say about where we could use some of this reserve. But I don't think I could support something that took us all the way back down to 4.5 when we have these uncertainties coming. When we voted on the budget in the fall, I knew, or last year, I knew that we had the full year with, because we were in the second half of a biennium. So we knew how much money we were going to get. We don't know this time. And until we do, I'm just really not comfortable spending way down. I'd like to find something where we could bolster where we need. We have emergency situations, and then put the rest away in case we do have that. More cuts, kicker kicking, legislature not coming through for us, lots of different uncertainties that I think that we should just be more aware of and think about a little more. So, Tom?
Yeah, and I appreciate, I appreciate that, and I think that's what this amendment says. Let's look at the urgent needs, come back, and then on February 10th, we can make the hard choice and agree what the right reserve is.
So,
but for now, we know we have some resources, and we know we've got a lot of needs, so let's have our superintendent come back and inform
and I'm fine
us.
with that, as long as we're not saying that we want the superintendent to come back automatically withdrawing the reserves down to 4.5.
We're going to vote on that on February 10th.
Yeah, you're not specific in your resolution about how far, like I can come back with, you're giving me.
I'd like to
come
see-
back with as if here's a menu that could take us to that, but you haven't decided that's the level you're asking for until we look at the list on the 10th.
Yes, that's correct.
I could support that.
And, certainly my intent is to do that, but you might come back and have a perfectly good argument that's going to change my mind.
So what I'm hearing is commit, and the new resolved number 2, which was the former third paragraph, commits the surplus contingency necessary, a plan that assesses the immediate urgent unfunded needs in our schools and commits the surplus contingency necessary to support school programs, period.
So
Is that-
Ruth, let's just stop right there for a second. That was I think maybe friendly, maybe unfriendly.
I'm told there's no
amendment.
such thing as I've always been told that there's no
No
such
friend-
thing as a friendly
Okay.
amendment. I do think you could ask to amend the amendment.
So my
You could
question
go ahead
is,
and do
did
that,
you
and then we
want to
can
do
vote on
that? Do
that.
you want to go ahead and do that?
I would like to ask to amend
Okay.
the amendment,
Great, and I would accept that.
friendly or not.
Yes.
Okay.
It's so weird to
Okay.
me. It seems
And
friendly.
there was,
Seems friendly
uh,
enough to me, but I'm told there is no such thing in reality.
Okay.
Is there?
And so
was
my
there anything
understanding,
else
Matt,
that
if I could
someone-
reiterate your friendly amendment, is in the first paragraph, we would take out the words this spring and summer. So
Right.
Roseanne, I wanted to make sure you got this. And then in the last paragraph, we would take out the words this year.
Correct.
Okay.
Can I ask another point of clarification? So you're requesting for a plan to come back on February 10th. Is that then for discussion on February 10th, then to be voted on at a subsequent
I
meeting?
think it's voting on, unless we absolutely need to, I think it's voting on that particular day, when you bring it back.
Bring
Have
the plan,
discussion
you guys have the
and
discussion,
vote.
and you vote
Is
on that day?
Yeah.
Is everybody fine with that?
And I
And I
guess,
would-
I want to be,
Director Curley.
I'm not crazy about your amendment, because for me, the point is making a difference
Yes.
this year. We're going to have a budget process that talks about next year. I want to know what we can do this year that makes a difference, and we continue to have a prudent reserve.
How about, can I make an unfriendly, friendly amendment about, it says to support school programs this school year?
Yes, that's sure.
Does that work?
Yes.
So I
Dr.
have to
Valado?
admit, I don't know exactly what wording we're voting on at this point, which
Well,
calls to me.
we'll go through that
I know.
before we vote.
It calls to me the question about getting a written amendment the day of, which I thought we were trying to avoid, that I'd spoken individually with individuals about saying what kind of level would you
Right.
appreciate, but I'm not clear where.
Well, you actually had this yesterday, so
I will, I'll read through it at the
this
end.
wasn't the day of.
Well, I'm seeing it right now, just so you know.
Yeah, I'm just for, did you not see it yesterday?
I did not see it yesterday.
Yeah, it was on your email. Yeah.
So I guess my other question is around where it says, this is in the number 2, in keeping with paragraph. It says commits the surplus contingency necessary. I guess that's all right. I was a little worried about it would make it sound like it was all the way up to 7%, but if it's just necessary, that's fine.
So so is it correct
Is there
then that the
anything else?
intent of this is that the superintendent's going to bring back a menu,
Bring the board back a plan by February 10th.
but that we're not necessarily, what I'm hearing Tom say is we're not necessarily committing by voting for this that we would invest all of the 2.5% this year?
No,
But
we
the
get to,
superintendent-
we get to vote on that February 10th.
Okay. But the plan that you come back will have a menu of options.
You may
that
pick
could
part of the
include
plan
that.
and not all of the plan. You
Got it.
may, yeah, I mean, your discussion about how much you want to commit and how much you want to hold
Okay, and
is still to be had on the 10th as part
And-
of the menu.
so we don't have the text about the one time. Do we want to
We're
make
not
sure?
putting that in. This doesn't go.
Right, but do we want to put that back in where the wording is so that it's clarified that it is one time or not?
Not for me.
So then it's something that might then just sort of fold over into the next year's budget process, be carried over into that.
Could.
Okay.
So, if I
Director
can.
Morton?
I want to, I really respect the urgency, the need that exists, but I mean, from my perspective, I would move towards strategy versus urgency any part of any opportunity I get. So, Tom, to your point of wanting to see sort of the immediate benefit,
Which is a strategy.
certainly it could be a strategy unless you're making urgent decisions. But perhaps that's a strategy too. I think also one of the things we know is that there are a select few investments that in the short term demonstrate evidence of gain, but without sustaining those over the long term, that gain is lost. If there's an opportunity, and this is, to my earlier point of if there is an investment that we can make right now that is something that is sustainable with the current resource, I would like to look at that. That could provide both a short-term sort of urgent gain. It could also provide a longer-term opportunity for us to sustain that. So that would be my intention. And I don't necessarily have what that investment might be.
Sure.
But I can anticipate something like that happening. I don't mind at all the urgency of identifying here are the things that need to be done in a short period by the end of this year, and I would anticipate the superintendent presenting that information and those opportunities in that frame. But I don't want to say that's the only time frame I'm concerned about. If this is something that goes beyond that, let's talk about that as well.
Okay.
Got that?
Yeah, fair enough.
Dr. Blau?
So I'm not sure where these comments go anymore because I'm pretty sure that we have the original proposed amendment the resolution 5013. We have a second amendment on the table, and we have a third amendment on the table
I'm not seeing that.
There was a friendly amendment to the
No.
second amendment, and everybody kind of, are you
We
okay
have
with?
we have an amendment that was proposed by Tom and Bobby that
Right.
was then taken off the table.
Right.
And then we have another amendment that is the one we're
But then-
discussing now that has these certain paragraphs in
Then
it.
there was a
And then there was a
wordsmithing when
word,
people were
there
friendly.
was a second amendment, friendly amendment to that
Which is the
by
second
Matt.
amendment. That's
And
the
that's
third
it.
amendment that I'm talking about. So
Yeah, so we
that's what I'm
Which
saying.
hasn't
So-
been seconded.
And I'm not
One
even
from
sure,
Matt?
I mean, here's the point, I think technically we can't have two amendments sitting, we
Mhm.
can have a motion. But I don't want to get bogged down, I think we all understand the intent. If somebody wants to call that point of order, they can, but I'm not planning to. So I'm just going to make my comments about the whole process, and it can fit where it wants to. So I find myself agreeing with Director Knowles that I am less sure of where things are going to land, and I disagree about the kicker in the terms that I think it will cause real harm now and in our next budget cycle. I also think that we keep talking about this additional revenue or this extra surplus or something. You know, I believe that jurisdictions across the metro area are in a similar situation, revenues increasing in ways that they didn't expect. I've heard some figures that are in the double digits across the metro area about their contingencies, uncommitted contingencies. But what they don't have, meaning those other organizations or jurisdictions, is they don't have a mechanism that we do, which is the state, anytime there's quote-unquote extra revenue. So when I hear that we're going to take an additional $5 million from our local option levy, which is fantastic that voters did it, there is a reclaiming mechanism by the state saying, oh, well, we said you were going to give you this much, and we don't find that out until January or February of next year, whether or not that's taken. So I don't want to say, I'll just say that I'm cautious. I didn't expect us to be at 7%, and I totally agree that there are needs in our schools right now. But what resonated with me is Director Morton's comment about, I will choose strategy over urgency any day. And I worry that in our haste to move this out, as you heard tonight, our PAT partners came up with some great solutions, and I think I heard language of something that these are just some of our ideas. I have a list of ideas in my head. We heard public comment about other ideas. There's an infinite number of ideas. And I heard somebody comment about saying that we have an opportunity to impact student achievement. I don't know how many one-time investments are going to really impact student achievement. And so I question our process with this. It feels a little bit to me like government just trying to spend the money so it doesn't look like we have too much, instead of being really thoughtful and strategic with it. I'm not accusing any of you of that. This is just how I'm processing the information about what we're doing. I did, Director Curler, look at my email. I received it at 4:48 yesterday. And so then when I went to a town hall, I probably didn't get to it last night, so my apologies for thinking that I just got it today. But I got a little bit over 24 hours notice about the amendment. I'm not sure that our community had an opportunity to come in and weigh in. But again, that doesn't seem to be the big concern here, because we did go through a budget process last year that identified those needs. So I guess that's just where I'm sitting, is that I'm not excited about sitting at 7%. If the superintendent, if folks want the superintendent to come back with identified needs that perhaps we can start this year and carry into next year, not knowing what next year's budget, I'd be interested in hearing those. But I don't want to spend just because there's an urgency and that we have money to spend it. And that's what it feels a little bit like to me.
Well, I mean, I'm glad it feels that way to you, because that's the way it is. We have urgent needs, and we have money that we can spend on those urgent needs. And that is what, if you want to vote against this amendment, then that's fine. And what you're saying is, we have urgent needs, and we're going to keep our money at 7%. And this amendment says, we have urgent needs, and we're going to take a look at those and make a decision on February 10th. What are the highest priorities? And at the end of the day, what is a prudent reserve? In my view, 4.5 reserve, given everything on the table, is prudent.
I heard you say that.
Yeah. So.
Okay. So thank you to Director Belisle for bringing up the process questions or the parliamentary issues, and we can have an amendment to an amendment, but only one. So Matt, you're going to have to wait till we vote on this one, and then you can bring your amendment for that. Okay. So why don't I go ahead and read what we're currently voting on, just to make sure that everybody is, did you have anything else, Steve?
No, I don't.
Okay.
I was just commenting to...
Steve, are you not going to say anything? This is going to be...
Okay, so we are amending...
I'm worried about a sandbag.
We are amending the resolution section of Resolution 5013 to add, as number 2, Amendment number 2 to the 2014-15 budget shows uncommitted contingencies at 7% rather than 4.5%. Board policy requires 3% with an aspirational goal of 5%. For number 3, in keeping with Resolution 4961 and given the severe and ongoing needs in our schools, the board directs the superintendent to bring the board a plan by February 10 that assesses the immediate, urgent, unfunded needs in our schools and commits the surplus contingency necessary to support school programs this spring and summer. And 4, as part of the assessment and expenditure plan, the board further requests the superintendent to communicate with principals and teachers, soliciting their ideas on how to make the most difference for the achievement outcomes this year with the surplus. Is that clear to everybody?
Yeah.
Okay. So all those in favor of the amendment, please.
Roll
Oh, well, we'll do it after. All those who are in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
Wait, are we voting on the amendment?
On the amendment.
On the amendment? No.
No?
No.
No. I'm going to be a no. Okay. Let me go. 1, 2, 3, 4. Are you yes or no?
I'm a yes.
You're a yes. Okay, so the
We have a
amendment,
roll call
and we will do that in just a second. Hang
Okay.
on.
No, I mean on this.
On this
we
one,
voted on.
exactly.
What we
Yes,
just voted on.
yes, we will. Hang on.
Okay, thank you.
So the motion to, for the amendment passes on a vote of 4 to 3. Ms. Powell, would you go ahead and call a roll call vote for us?
Yes. Director Belisle?
No.
Director Regan?
Yes.
Director Atkins?
No.
Director Buell?
Yes.
Director Morton?
Yes.
Director Curler?
Yes.
Sorry, that was for the vote that we had just taken,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
And Chair
Not-
Knowles?
not-
No.
Okay. It's fine.
Did you want to amend this?
I would like to make an amendment, propose an amendment.
To the amendment?
To the amendment.
In the resolve titled "In Keeping with Resolution 4961," the last 3 words of the resolve or actually last 4 words eliminating this spring and summer. And then part
Change
2,
it to the school year? Or you just wanted to say?
to support school programs, period.
All right.
And then second part, same amendment, part 2, would be last line reading for student achievement and outcomes with the surplus,
Okay, so
removing the words this year.
Okay. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay. Any discussion on that?
I
I
have
think
a
we pretty much
question.
covered it. Steve?
Question.
Director Buell?
You removed the words spring and summer, but was that clarifying only spring and summer someplace? That assesses immediate, urgent, and unfunded needs of our schools and commits the surplus funds necessary to support school programs this spring and summer?
What I was concerned.
You're just saying school programs, so are you saying, is your intent that you could do a summer program out of this money if you wanted?
Yeah,
Okay,
my
fine.
intent,
Okay,
my
just
intent
check.
with this is
I just
just to
wanted to
make
check.
sure that we don't say, oh, that's a fall
Spring
program.
and summer, right, yeah, okay. Right.
We can't do that.
Good.
That's my
Gotcha.
only intent.
Thank you.
Director Regan?
So I have mixed feelings on this because there was the piece of the urgency. At the same time, I can see the superintendent coming back and saying, you know what, we really want to make sure that we have career technical education programs next year in our schools. And I think if Roosevelt is one that now doesn't have a CTE program that's state certified, I think Lincoln only has one. I can see her saying, you know what, I want to purchase curriculum materials and supplies or whatever it's going to take to be able to do that in the next year, and I can do that now. Or she could say, in terms of 6th through 8th grade band programs, if we really want to get that started, we could make an investment today in musical instruments, and then as we are staffing, we can look forward to blah, blah, blah. So I guess I'm fine with that because I see this sort of tied to setting us up for next year, and we have some opportunity here to have some impact. So I guess I'm okay with it.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think our intent.
Other comments?
So,
Director Blau?
sorry, this isn't really about Director, never mind. It's not about Director Morton's amendment. It's about Director Regan's comments, but.
No comment. All right. In that case, no more discussion. We will go ahead and vote on the amendment, which out of, this is number 3, paragraph 3 of the resolution, removes the last 4 words, this spring and summer, and in paragraph number 4, removes from the last sentence, this year. Okay. All those in favor of the amendments, please say aye.
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 All those opposed? Okay. The amendment passes with a vote of 7-0. Now, shall we go ahead and vote on the resolution? Sure. Okay. Any other discussion? I want to shut anybody down here. Director Atkins.
Yeah, I appreciate the discussion on this and the changes, and certainly the spirit of wanting to support our schools. But I think for me, I certainly want the original. It's just a little confusing that this resolution happens to be called an amendment. But I certainly want to make sure that the original amendment number 2 to our 2014 budget is passed. But seeing the support that's here for that, I'm still going to be a no vote because I'm concerned that we're creating sort of an additional parallel mini budget process that does not feel to me strategic, and I feel like we need to be proceeding in a manner that both respects that process and that respects the fact that we are in a period of a lot of uncertainty. All that said, I'm looking forward, if this passes, which I'm guessing it will, certainly if the superintendent can quickly, without having to prolong a process, is able to come back with some suggestions for some immediate investments, that's great. The down to 4.5% is still too far for me, given what's in front of us, as some of us have already said.
Okay. Other comments? Anyone? No. Okay, the board will now vote on Resolution 5013. All in favor, please indicate by saying yes.
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 All opposed, please indicate by saying no.
No.
No abstentions. Resolution 5013 is approved by a vote of 6-1. Ms. Powell, we've had a request for a roll call. Can you go ahead and call that for us?
Of course. Director Belisle.
Director Belisle votes in the affirmative, yes.
Director Regan.
Yes.
Director Atkins.
No.
Director Buell.
Yes.
Director Morton.
Yes.
Director Curler.
Yes.
Chair Knowles.
Yes. Thank you, everybody. I thought that was a really helpful discussion. So, and well done. So now, our next agenda item is an update on our inter-district transfers. Superintendent Smith, would you like to go ahead and introduce this item?
I would, and this is something that we do every year, and I'll introduce Judy Brennan, Director of Enrollment and Transfer, to come and present this item to you.
I'm getting closer. Good evening. And I think we've got PowerPoint that is ready to go too. And as I set this up, I would like to take a moment to take a moment to thank you for the dedication that you have invested in enrollment and transfer issues. You have many, many critical topics to discuss. You've spent an enormous amount of time around enrollment and transfer issues, particularly in the last 2 months. And yet, here I am again. Tonight is a very brief update, and the issues that you'll be hearing from me over the next few weeks don't have the big scale that some of the things you've been looking at. So I appreciate your time on this as well. So as the superintendent said, every year the districts have to make a decision about open enrollment, which is one aspect of enrollment and transfer. So I'm going to talk very briefly about that. And then you'll see that come before you for a vote in the coming weeks. And then we have our routine interdistrict process that will be kicking off later in the spring. We'll probably come back to you in March with an update on that. So the big picture is that about 2% of students who attend Portland Public Schools live in other districts. And that 2% has been consistent for at least 5 years. So as our enrollment has grown, our numbers of non-resident students has grown with it. And a fair amount of those students attend charters, alternative, and special schools, and they're able to enroll through different mechanisms if they live in other districts. But what I'll be talking about tonight is mostly the access points for students who attend our mainstream schools, our neighborhood schools, focus options. As you are probably well aware, we've got recent state laws that continue to change the procedures available for students, and that's an ongoing process that we'll be updating you on over the course of this year. One thing that we have to do every year is ask you to decide whether our district will be open to a process that the state calls open enrollment. It's a law that was approved in 2011 and is facing sunset in a couple of years. You have to declare by March 1st, and if you choose to participate, what it basically means is that we can accept non-resident students through a lottery procedure without needing to obtain permission from their resident districts. PPS has opted out of an open enrollment to date, and to put it in a nutshell, we found that the mechanisms that open enrollment requires have been largely incongruous with our high school system design and our overall transfer goals, particularly now the transfer policy decisions that you made just last week. Having said that, there are students from PPS who have enrolled in other districts through open enrollment. Over the last 3 years, it's been a total of 340. They've transferred out, and they have the right to stay in other districts to the highest grade through 12th grade, and PBS doesn't have any say on whether they come back or not. Because we don't have a lot of data on our open enrollment students who live there, who leave, there's a couple of points that I still don't have thorough answers to that you may be interested in. For example, what's the cumulative effect? All the students who left, are they still in those districts? Have they moved on? Have they gone to other places? And all of those students who left, what we know is that a number of them were not attending PPS in the first place. So they were in private school, they were paying tuition to attend other districts, and then they opted in through open enrollment. So it's a little difficult to quantify what the actual impact of the students are. I mean, we could magnify it and say all those students every year is the same as losing 300, more than 300 students per year. But a number of them probably wouldn't have attended PBS in the first place, and a number of them may not be attending those districts anymore. So it's a little unfinished, and I apologize for that because I know you like firm answers when I sit here. But that's where we are in terms of the effect of students who have left PPS through open enrollment. Our recommendation to you, which you've seen in an information report, is that PBS continue to opt out of open enrollment in 2015, knowing that that still means that we will follow the standard inter-district transfer procedure, that procedure that keeps 2% of our enrollment for kids coming in from other districts. And I'd like to talk to you about that briefly next. But I just wanted to make it clear that we do have that recommendation before you. You'll be seeing that as a resolution at the next meeting where you're carrying out votes. So about the standard interdistrict procedure. So it's standard today is very different than what it was 4 years ago, for example, or even 3 years ago. A couple of the things that are the same. So in the standard procedure, that thing that we do outside of the open enrollment period, so for 11 months out of the year, both districts have to consent in order for a transfer to be approved. So with open enrollment, only the receiving district has to say yes. With the standard process, both districts have to say yes. The new rules under the new legislation is that the non-resident district, the receiving district, gets to decide how long an agreement lasts. In the old days, agreements were always for 1 year and had to be renewed every year. Now they can last for a period of time. Under your direction, when we implemented last year, we implemented new agreements that last through the highest grade of the school the student attends. So if a student came in through kindergarten, was attending a K-5, they now have an inter-district transfer that can last with them through 5th grade. They don't have to receive permission every year. Furthermore, their resident district, wherever it may be, doesn't have permission to say no to them through the 12th grade. So if they ask to come back into PBS, say for 6th grade, or again for 9th grade, and we say yes, their resident district doesn't have the right to say no. That's what's different largely from what the old inter-district laws were. Additionally, and I think that we've really seen that this is a real benefit for families, is that students who move during the year do not need to receive permission at the time that they move in order to stay and finish the year. They do have to get permission by the end of the year from both districts in order to come back into a non-resident district, but they don't have to get that paperwork in the middle of the school year any longer. Okay. Another thing that's different is in the old days, we could look at individual requests. People would give us information about their students, why they wanted to be in PPS. We could gather more information if we wanted to and then make a decision. We no longer have the opportunity to do that. All decisions need to be made through a blind lottery where we only have the student's name and grade level. We can't look at their academic history, their student characteristics. We can't even look at where they live. We can prioritize siblings, which is consistent with other transfer decisions that we make, and we can prioritize current students. So if there were 2 students asking to come into a certain school, we could prioritize the space for a student who was already attending, someone who had lived there before and moved away, than someone who was brand new. One thing that we heard a lot over the implementation of this procedure through the summer in particular is a lot of confusion and frustration. Families had to learn the new rules, not just for the district they wanted to attend, but the district that they were coming from. And there were cases where a family could be told, well, our district isn't going to give you permission. Now you have to go get permission from the other district first. And then they would get that permission, come back, and be told now it's too late to ask because we've closed our procedure. So it was a difficult, confusing time. And it was particularly challenging for our families who moved after the initial information came out. So it was a complete surprise to them and really difficult for our families who are English language learners. This is difficult bureaucracy in the best of times, but for a family unfamiliar with the procedures or the language in which it's being discussed, it was very, very difficult. So I wanted to tell you briefly what we're trying to do to improve that in order to make our next cycle even more family-friendly, efficient, timely, accurate, everything that we always want all of our transfer decisions to be. We're doing a couple of things right now. First of all, David Williams, on behalf of PPS, is participating in a multi-district working group that's looking at the statewide process improvements. And we believe that the legislature is going to take this up yet again in another session. But we also think that any rules that come out of this session won't take effect until 2016, so we'll actually have more than 2 months to figure out how to implement. And he's taken a lot of lessons learned from our experience here into that work group, and we hope that it's going to be helpful. I'm working with colleagues at neighboring districts in order to survey them and try and align our timelines and our procedures so that we don't wind up inadvertently trapping families sort of in between our islands of different procedures where they're just stuck in between and don't know what to do. And in response to all of that, we'll continue to refine our forms and our outreach in order to meet the needs of families better and consult with those who are trying to help us do outreach so that families know what to expect. I'll be coming back to you in March, probably with an update on where we are with the process, and there may be some decisions that we need you to make regarding how many slots will open up this year and the timeline to follow. So that is my update for you this evening. And if there's anything in particular you want to make sure I'm working on this over the next few weeks, this would be a great time for you to let me know.
Comments, questions? Director Buell?
As a discussion with Lee is so memorable, I'm sure you remember the discussion we had about a year ago, and you and I discussed it at some length. Is there changes in this from where we were back then? This is the same thing, because I was very satisfied at the end of our discussion that we were doing the right thing.
Thank you for remembering that as satisfactory. Thank you. No, and I do remember it very well.
I vaguely remember something about it. I remember the satisfaction at the end. That was it. Will you explain the 2%? Because we've gone through all this transfer. How does the 2% work? So if I have 600 kids in a school, is it by school, by district? See what I'm saying? I got 600 kids by school, 2% is 12 kids. So are 12 kids allowed in that school, or how does it all fit together?
So the 2% is not a quota. It just happens to be what the net effect of all of our decisions have been. And this is the number of students attending Portland Public Schools who have an address in another district as of October 2015. And then I went October 2014. And then I went back and I checked, so what was it in 2013? Well, what about 2011? What about 2008? and that 2% has been consistent. It is uneven across different types of schools and certainly at different schools. So you can go out to Kelly, a K-5 school in outer southeast that houses our Russian immersion program, and you'll see a much higher rate of non-residents attending because that program is particularly of interest to to families of Russian and Ukrainian heritage who no longer live in Portland Public Schools.
960 kids? 960 kids?
No. So the 2% is, I think it's about 1,150 students in Portland Public Schools this year who have addresses and other residents.
So 1,150, I was guessing 960 is 2%.
In charter schools, it's 12% of their enrollment. So in charter schools, you can enroll non-resident students without needing permission from any district, and 12% of the charter schools that are located in Portland and are part of Portland Public Schools, 12% of their enrollment is students from other districts. The total, there's an enrollment report that comes out every year, the big enrollment book. There's a table there that shows you non-resident enrollment by school and by type, and I can forward that to you if you'd be interested.
No.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
Dr. Regan?
Hi, I had two questions for you. The first one on this 2%. What percentage of the 2% of students who reside in other districts but attend school here pay tuition, and what percent have the state school funding follow them? So I assume the charter school kids, the state school funding follows them more or less.
Yes, to my knowledge, you can't pay tuition in a charter school, but I'm not positive on that. I can tell you that in our office.
But in a non-charter school, like how many of these kids pay tuition or do they?
So to my knowledge, it's about 8.
8 students?
Correct. We have a very small number of tuition-paying students in Portland Public Schools, but I'm not sure that that covers all of our tuition exchange agreements that might be in place for special schools. So students receiving unique special services have contracts between districts, and they may be counted in these numbers.
Okay.
So I can tell you for the really standard tuition agreements that we manage within our office, it's a very small number. Less than 10 in any given year.
Okay, and that makes sense when you talked about the contract. So I had another question on the memo that you sent to us. You talked about David Williams, our Director of Government Relations, and you kind of working in the legislature. One of the statements you said is, we hope to align our practices for the coming year with the longer-term goals of the legislature.
Mm-hmm.
So can you describe what the longer-term goals of the legislature are?
I'm gonna have David shadow for a minute in case you know, really. So in general, David has been able to provide information that shows that the state is interested in all districts following, for example, a common set of timelines for all inter-district transfer decisions. They're interested in us having different proportions of students that come and go that are equal, so that districts would have no more students coming in through inter-district transfer than going out. And so those are the kinds of things that he's been able to make me aware of, some of the working documents of this group. And now that we're aware that that's likely to be what the state's looking for us to do in the future, it gives us incentive to go ahead and see what we can do now that seeds good practice that will make sense in the future. That's pretty vague. Some of the direction that's coming is still in a pretty vague state, but I would imagine by March, when we come back, if this has been in committee, we'll have a better sense of what those new laws are going to be.
Other comments? Dr. Atkins?
Thanks so much, Judy. So if I recall correctly, I think it was last year's, in last year's process, we talked about for the Kelly, you brought up Kelly in particular, we talked about not wanting to ease the transition. We heard from a lot of parents who were concerned about the new law, and that, so to ease the transition, we made an exception. I'm not recalling the details exactly. Is that correct?
We were unable to make any such exceptions. The new laws don't allow it.
But I thought that we were able, we still have a lot, I guess I'm confused about what the current state is, because we have a lot of students who are in Kelly who do not reside in the district.
So for the first year that we're implementing these new laws, we had to, every student had to go through the agreement process.
Okay.
So all of the students who were in Kelly last year, who were able to receive permission from their resident districts, also got permission from us to remain. And so they'll be in the program and can stay without needing additional agreements through 12th grade. However, there are some students who wanted to enter the program for the first time, or even students who moved after the period of time when the information went out, who had been in the program, who didn't follow all of the rules with their resident districts and meet the timelines, or all of the spaces had been given out to other kids by then. And so we did see a number of students who wanted to come in and were unable to.
Okay. But we are now in a situation where once the students have been allowed into that process and remain to the highest grade, that we have severe overcrowding at that school. And as I understand it, our Head Start program is in danger of having to move out as a result. So I think just the question and the concern about whether there can be some kind of agreement with other districts, or even that we would start a charter school or something to be able to serve those families and have this awesome program, but also be able to serve our own district residents, and particularly our Head Start families. So I just raise that again as an issue of concern.
Absolutely very important. The Russian immersion program is a 2 sections per grade level program, and so the spaces available for non-resident students are available after all resident students have been able to apply and access it. If it was filled with resident students, then we would of course not have space for non-residents. So long as there is space, and so long as the purpose of that space is to support a strong program, then it makes good sense to have the doors open. The question of the long-term location of the program, whether it can be housed at Kelly in the long term, whether, given the interest from non-resident families, these mechanisms are the best way to go. If there's a better mechanism, there's a better way to operate the program so that families have freer access to it, regardless of which side of the boundary line they're on, then we continue to work towards those goals. And I would imagine as we get towards the district-wide boundary review and some of those long-term decisions that are coming forward, this will be one of the issues that comes up.
I mean, it just seems to me that it's tailor-made for that's what the charter, one good use of the charter school law, to be able to have that flexibility. So anyway, thank you.
Other? Thank you very much.
Thank you. See you again.
I think as Judy said, we'll be voting on a resolution around this at our February 24th meeting.
All right.
Okay, next on our agenda, board leadership election. Leadership roles are voted on twice annually. The state of Oregon requires the board to have a chair and a vice chair, so that's how the resolutions read. However, our board currently operates on a co-chair model. So our first leadership role is for board chair. Do I have any nominations for chair?
I'd like to nominate Director Atkins.
Okay. We will now consider Resolution 405014, election of board chairperson with Director Adkins nominated for this position. Do I have a motion and a second? So I have the motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Director Morton seconds. Director Belisle moves, and Director Morton seconds the motion to adopt Resolution 5014. Is there any board discussion? Director Buell.
About 1969, when I was teaching at Woodburn Middle School, actually junior high school then, I was teaching math, and we got into a deal about chess. We started playing chess all over the place. The teachers did. The teachers kind of did with the kids. After school, chess was really a big deal. And they redesigned the chessboard, which is kind of an interesting thing to do. We had all sorts of different, we would play on that. And they got so interested in chess that they decided they wanted to play the games faster, and so they shifted to what they used to call speed chess. And I don't know if people still play that, maybe they do, but we moved to, you moved as fast as you could, just as quick and fast as you could with speed chess. And the game was, you got the game over with, but it was a different game. It was one where you didn't think through what it was. You just kind of, the whole idea was to get through. And Really, chess is best played when the professionals play, and when you play, you set a time limit, a reasonable time limit to stay between. You don't just let anything go because you can be in a chess. I mean, there are people who play chess over the mail, and it goes on for years, basically, almost a game. And I don't want to go to speed chess, and that's my concern about voting for Director Adkins, because everything that we do in her, not her as a person, but her behavior is to speed it up. Hurry it up. Let's get this done. Let's go, go, go. We got to get this done. And we don't take the time that I've seen when she's pushing things like that to really stop and think. We have tremendous responsibility on this board. I've gone through it over and over. We got about $1 billion of tax money that we mess with. We've got almost 50,000 kids. We've got over probably 100 properties. We've got a tremendous amount of responsibility here, and I don't want to go zoom, zoom, zoom. So I'm hoping that if Director Adkins gets everybody else's vote but mine, or however it comes down, because I'm not going to vote for speed chess, that she'll take that into consideration and not be afraid to allow people to talk when they want to talk a little bit, even if, so you can at least get the in between, the best chess game, not the worst. So I'll be voting no on this.
Dr. Belial?
I like your analogy. I used to like chess when I was in middle school.
Yeah,
People still do play
Wait,
chess.
We
and
play
it's
it out in
Through the mail?
It's
We,
Pony
I
Express.
think don't we have a couple good chess clubs in the district? Don't we?
It's,
That have done quite well.
speed chess develops a different set of skills, but
Yes.
I understand your point.
Think quick.
And the irony isn't lost on me that tonight Director Adkins votes to actually involve more process for a budget amendment on the same time you're saying it goes too fast, but thanks.
Okay, the board will now vote on Resolution 5014. All in favor, please indicate by saying yes.
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 All opposed, please indicate by saying no.
No.
Resolution 5014, I'm sorry, Dr. Regan, I didn't hear your vote.
I was trying to decide.
Well, now's
Sorry.
the time, not to rush you.
Roll call, please. Roll call,
Speed.
please. Roll call, please.
I had, I'll vote yes, because I
Okay.
appreciate-
Resolution 5014 is approved by a vote of 6-1. Thank you. Now, nominations for vice chair.
Wasn't there a roll call request?
Oh, did you ask for roll call?
Yes, I did. I'm
Okay.
sorry.
Ms.
And-
Powell, will you go
and
ahead and do
I
a
want
roll
the
call?
next vote too, please.
Okay.
I think I forgot to vote, so that's good.
Okay, Director Belial.
I just
Yes.
assumed you would vote yes.
Director Regan.
Yes.
Director Atkins.
Yes.
Director Buell.
No.
Director Morton.
Yes.
Director Curler.
Yes.
Chair Knowles.
Yes. Okay.
You bet. Thank
All
you.
right. Next, for the position of board vice chair, resolution, do I have a nomination for vice chair? Director Martin.
I'd like to nominate Director Knowles for vice chair.
Thank you. We'll now consider Resolution 5015, election of board vice chair with Director Knowles nominated for this position. Do we have a motion and a second? I have a motion from Director Morton. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, Director Morton moves and Director Atkins seconds the motion to adopt Resolution 5015. Board discussion? More chess? Director
No,
Buell?
This might be a little more direct in the chess analogy. Some time ago, I don't know, maybe 3/4 of a year, I went through all the procedures that are listed in our policy book, asking that I could make a motion at the meeting, and the procedure is to go through the superintendent, and the superintendent write it up, and so forth. There are procedures that are in policy, and I've complained about that never taking place, and that motion was centered around being able to put something on the agenda at a meeting here, and Director Knowles supports not being able to put things on the agenda in that manner, because otherwise we would have had that perfectly legal and correctly done motion come forward. I am very concerned and have been, and I've spoke for a long time about us doing everything in the back room. And I think that that's kind of how we go about it. It's backroom stuff. For instance, I would have liked to have made a motion tonight. I have all these people out here with the signs up, and it's amazing that you can hold that sign up for that long. I guess it's because most of you are fairly young. So I don't, it was terrific. And last time you were here, we threw you out. And the time before you were here...
Director Buell, would you just keep on the... No, you are moving off of the topic.
This is exactly why I don't want to vote for you. It's right here, because I get that this is on the topic. This is the reason that I'm not voting for you.
Well, that's fine,
It's
but
hard
you
for
are
you to
off
figure out.
topic,
No,
but that's okay.
I'm not off topic at all. I'm right on it. I'm going to keep going as long as I'm on the topic. And if you want to have a vote to shut me up, you might be able to figure out how to do that, but otherwise it's not going to finish. And so the time before, we shut down the meeting and walked out. Some of us, including the chairperson. I think there's a lot better way to handle that type of thing. One of the better ways, for instance, we could invite the Don't Shoot people to make a presentation at our next meeting and say, what is the problem here? And give them some time and allow them to make a presentation. These are not radical, crazy people someplace. These are bright people who believe that they have a serious grievance. But I'm not allowed to make that motion because we do it all in the back rooms and not out here in the board. And so I'd much rather do it in the board, and since Chairman Knowles doesn't like to do it that way, evidently, I'm not planning to vote for her. And at least now, no one will reach over and put their hand in front of me to shut me up. So there you go. Thank you very much. I think that was all on topic.
You know, Steve, I've never put my hand in front of you.
You did it tonight.
I
It's
did no
okay.
such thing.
Director.
I try and treat my colleagues with respect.
That's what I would
There is a process for bringing stuff forward to the board. You've never agreed to follow the process. When you do, it will come forward, just like all the rest of us. So, Director Belial?
I just want to mention that I guess I'm a little confused by Director Buell's comments, but sometimes that happens. Because I hear sometimes a real strong desire to follow board policy, and board policy that talks about the process and where agendas are set was established well before I was on the board, well before I think even Director Knowles. I don't know if Director Regan, if it was before you were on the board. But they were born out of a desire to actually move things forward in the process for how things are discussed, very similar to other elected bodies in how it's. And at one point we were discussing whether or not, when you were claiming back rooms, you stated an issue that you felt it was inappropriate for the superintendent and the co-chairs to be in the back room because the policy says the chair, as Director Knowles points out what the state requires for us to do, that basically the co-chair was included in that. That felt like a backroom deal to you. So I'm not sure whether you want us to follow policy or if you are actually against a co-chair model, which would be an interesting discussion that we could have at our board retreat. I know that there are a couple of people here whom I disagree with because I'm actually in favor of a strong chair who gets to sit with the superintendent and do that, but there are others who do not. So I guess I'm just a little bit surprised, but before I lose the floor, I just want to thank Director Knowles for all the effort because while there's much direction pointed in your way to move things similar to Speaker of the House or other leadership positions, your obligation to this body, to all 7 of us, is to keep us in line with policy, in line with procedure, and it is often a thankless job. So I just want to thank you for your time.
Thank you. Director Buell?
Mr. Belial, where my complaint on the backroom stuff was not that the vice chairman was there, but that she, in this case, she or he, whomever, is part of the decision-making process, and that was the problem. You can't follow everything perfectly, but you can certainly allow people to have way more of a say than we've had since I've been on this board. I mean, there's a lot of, you can go find a lot of school boards where people, they have time where people can just speak to what they want, or maybe even make some sort of a motion that's not a big deal. That's the type of thing. It's an openness that and a transparency that I'm always have been worried about, and I continue to worry about it, which is why I won't be voting for Director Knowles, as nice a woman as she is.
Other comments? Director
Just,
Furman.
just want to echo the thanks. I know having the gavel is not an easy thing to do at all, and oftentimes it's high pressure, and things come at you and you don't know they're coming at you. With this vote, you're stepping down and handing it over to, so I just thank you for your efforts.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, and I also would say I am not a co-chair kind of person. I like the chair, vice chair, but I could not have done this role without the assistance and the support of my co-chair, Ruth Atkins. She did an absolutely fabulous job of helping me, as you guys all know, because you've talked to her on occasions, when we're trying to move things, helping us get the work done. So I'm very excited that she's going to be our presiding co-chair in the future. Director Regan.
So I'm going to be voting no, and part of the reason is I believe that we should be sharing leadership among the 7 board members, and I think that while I appreciate your leadership, I also believe that it's time for us to be sharing a little bit more. I think in all of the years that Ruth's been on the board, this may be the first time that you're actually the chair. Is that true or not?
Presiding chair, yeah.
Yeah, and so I'm glad you're having that opportunity at last. So,
Okay. Anybody else? No? Okay. The board will now vote on Resolution 5015. All in favor, please indicate by saying yes.
Yes.
Opposed, please indicate by saying no.
No.
Resolution 5015 is approved by a vote of 5-2. Ms. Powell, I think Director Buell would wanted a roll call vote on this one as well.
Sure. Director Belisle?
Yes.
Director Regan?
No.
Director Atkins?
Yes.
Director Buell?
No.
Director Morton?
Yes.
Director Curler?
Yes.
Chair Knowles?
Yes. Okay. Thank you, everybody. Our last agenda item is our business agenda. Having already, the board now consider the remainder of its business agenda, having already voted on resolutions 5011 and 5015. Ms. Powell, are there any changes to the business agenda?
No, there isn't.
Okay. Do I have a motion and a second?
So moved.
Second.
Director Morton moves and Director Atkins seconds the adoption of the business agenda. Any public comment?
No.
Any board discussion on the business agenda? No. And I lost my last page.
So the meeting won't end.
So the meeting cannot end. The board will now vote on business agenda. All in favor, please indicate by saying yes.
Yes.
Yes. All opposed, please indicate by saying no. Any abstentions? The board agenda is approved by a vote of 7-0. Before I adjourn the meeting, I'd like to remind everyone that to take the successful school survey. I also would note for the television public and others that we have quite a crowd here tonight with signs, and I want to personally thank each one of you for expressing your concerns and comments to us in a respectful manner so that we can continue the board work and the work of the district. So thank you very much for being here tonight to let us know your thoughts. And I would tell some of you that it's got to be below your chin or the people behind you can't see you. Can't see us or anything else. So appreciate you trying to do that. The next meeting.
Don't want to invite them, right? Don't want to invite them.
The next meeting of the board will be on Tuesday, February 3rd, and will begin at 7, and this meeting is adjourned at 7.